Hello there and welcome to Just About Earth, where curiosity gets cozy and science takes the scenic route into questions that feel both impossible and irresistible. Tonight, we're not just looking at the stars or the flow of time or the rhythm of nature, but something a little closer to the heart. What if we were placed here? Not simply born of slow geological accidents and biological improvisations, not just the product of chance collisions of atoms and molecules, but intentionally here, on this very planet, at this very moment. It's a thought that has followed humanity for as long as we've been able to look up and wonder. Whether it comes dressed as a myth, a religion, a theory about ancient visitors, or a quiet late-night suspicion, the question has always lingered. Are we where we are because someone or something decided it should be so? Before we begin, I'd love to ask you something small but grounding. Where are you listening from tonight? Maybe you're tucked away in a quiet room, winding down for sleep. Maybe you're out walking, earbuds in, the hum of the world around you. Maybe you're at work, sneaking in a little mental detour during the day. Whatever your setting, I'd be curious to know, because it's fitting that this question about placement begins with noticing our own place in this moment. Where you sit, what time it is, what you feel in your corner of the world, all of it ties you to this idea in a subtle way. And if you find this journey soothing, interesting, or just a pleasant way to slow down, I'd be grateful if you tapped like or subscribed. It helps this little patch of calm and curiosity find others who might also want to pause from the constant pace of everyday life. So let's drift in slowly. Imagine standing outside on a clear night. The stars are scattered across the sky, the moon hanging there with its familiar pale glow. In that quiet, it's almost impossible not to wonder how it all began. Why here? Why now? Why us? The thought that maybe we were placed here intentionally carries with it two feelings at once: comfort and unease. Comfort, because it suggests we are not an accident, that perhaps there is a purpose to our existence. Unease, because if we were placed here, then someone or something did the placing, and that raises 1,000 more questions about who, why, and to what end. Our story usually begins with science. Evolution, natural selection, mutations building on each other across billions of years. And that story makes sense. It fits the evidence. It explains how creatures adapt to their environment. But here's where things get curious. Sometimes the pace of human development looks less like a slow climb and more like a leap. Stone tools remain simple for hundreds of thousands of years. Then suddenly art, language, agriculture, and cities appear in what is, geologically speaking, the blink of an eye. That leap, often called the cognitive revolution, remains one of the great puzzles. Why did our ancestors' minds expand so suddenly? Why did symbolic thought, culture, and technology burst forth, almost as if someone flipped a switch? It isn't only modern scientists who have noticed this. Ancient cultures across the world told stories that framed humanity as placed, not merely evolved. The Sumerians spoke of beings called the Anunnaki, who descended from the skies and guided civilization. The Dogon people of West Africa described visitors from the star Sirius, who shared knowledge about the cosmos long before telescopes could confirm it. Native American traditions speak of sky beings, messengers who shaped life and offered wisdom. Even the Bible begins with humanity not struggling into existence from nothing but being created and placed into a garden. When you set these stories side by side, scattered across continents and centuries, a pattern begins to take shape. People didn't just imagine themselves as part of nature, slowly growing from it. They imagined being set down by others, often from above, often with a purpose. Were these simply stories to explain the unknown? Or were they memories, dim echoes of something our ancestors really experienced? And then there's Earth itself. We often call it the Goldilocks planet. Not too hot, not too cold, just right. Water flows here. The atmosphere is balanced for our lungs. The soil grows food. The seasons shape cycles of life. Skeptics argue, of course we fit here. We evolved here, so naturally we're suited to it. But sometimes it feels the other way around, as if the planet were tuned, adjusted, prepared to host us. The anthropic principle says that we see the universe this way because if it weren't suited to us, we wouldn't be here to ask. But some can't shake the suspicion that maybe it isn't just coincidence. Maybe Earth was chosen, maybe humanity was placed here because it was the perfect stage. Let's imagine, just for a moment, that you are not human at all, but an observer from far away. You're watching this planet over billions of years, oceans forming, mountains rising, forests spreading, and then, suddenly, within a short flicker of time, you see something unusual. A species appears that reshapes the land, builds cities, sends signals into space, launches machines beyond its own atmosphere. If you didn't know better, you might think this species had been dropped in from somewhere else, because no other animal on the planet does anything remotely like it. Our brains in particular stand out. Large relative to our bodies, hungry for energy, capable of imagination, memory and self-awareness far beyond what survival alone requires. Most creatures adapt to their niche and stop there. Birds fly, fish swim, lions hunt. Humans don't just adapt. We imagine futures, invent tools that nature never offered, write stories and record knowledge across generations. It's as though our minds are overbuilt for our environment, too capable, too prepared. Why do we have this extra capacity? Did it simply emerge through chance, or did something or someone intend it? Scientists who study evolution often point to the rapid leap in human intelligence as a puzzle. It's sometimes explained as the result of language or social cooperation, or changes in diet that fueled bigger brains. But even within those explanations, there's an air of mystery. How did so many traits align so quickly? Why us, and not another species? Some thinkers have taken the question further. What if life on Earth itself wasn't entirely homegrown? There's the theory of Panspermia, the idea that life's building blocks, or even primitive organisms, arrived here from space, carried on asteroids or comets. If true, that would mean Earth wasn't just the cradle of life, but the incubator, seeded intentionally or by chance from somewhere else. And if life can be seeded, then perhaps intelligence can too. Could humanity have been shaped, nudged, or even placed here by a civilization far older than our own? If so, what purpose would that serve? Maybe we were an experiment. Maybe we were a project. Maybe we were meant to carry something forward. Or, another possibility, what if it wasn't aliens from the stars, but humans themselves from the future? The idea that time might be more flexible than we think raises strange possibilities. If our distant descendants learned to travel through time, could they have seeded their own origins, placing themselves in the past to ensure their future? These ideas are, of course, speculative, even wild, but they have always lived in the human imagination because they speak to a deeper truth. We want to know if our presence here matters. We want to know if our existence is the result of design or accident. And the question, what if we were placed here, becomes less about the mechanics and more about the meaning. You might notice how this question flows into both science and myth, into both logic and feeling. It's a bridge between our need for evidence and our hunger for story, and perhaps that's why it endures. So tonight, as we begin this long exploration together, let's not try to settle it too quickly. Let's not rush to decide whether humanity was seeded by ancient civilizations, by cosmic gardeners, by future humans, or by no one at all. Instead, let's walk slowly through the evidence, the myths, the theories, and the possibilities. Let's see where each trail leads, and notice what it stirs in us as we follow it. Let's stay with the question a little longer, because it isn't the kind of thought you can glance at and move past. It's the kind of thought that lingers, echoing in the background while you make tea, or wait for a bus, or scroll through your phone at night. What if we were placed here? The words themselves are simple, but the idea behind them opens into a vast landscape of possibilities. Placed here by whom? Placed here why? Placed here when? The more you tug at it, the more threads appear, and soon you're holding something much larger than the original question. For most of us, the starting point is still the same. We exist. We're here on Earth, a planet that supports us in ways so precise that it sometimes feels uncanny. If you list out all the little details that make life possible, it begins to sound like a checklist written for our survival. Oxygen levels balanced just right for our lungs, an atmosphere thick enough to shield us but thin enough to let light through, a magnetic field that protects us from radiation, liquid water covering the surface, a stable sun with a steady output of energy, a moon that regulates tides and stabilizes Earth's tilt. Each of these conditions is extraordinary on its own, but together they form something astonishingly rare. Scientists will often say, "Of course it looks this way. If the conditions weren't right, we wouldn't be here to notice." That's the anthropic principle again, reminding us that observation itself is biased by survival. But even so, the question nags. Is it really just coincidence that everything lined up so perfectly? Or is there a possibility, however strange, that we were placed here intentionally? When people first hear this idea, they usually split into two camps. One camp says, no, that's unnecessary. We evolved here, step by step, through natural processes, and to imagine otherwise is just storytelling. The other camp says, but wait, maybe it isn't so simple. Maybe there's more to the story than gradual evolution and blind chance. Both responses are understandable, and both leave room for curiosity. Let's follow the second camp for a moment. Suppose, just as a thought experiment, that we really were placed here. What does that mean? One possibility is that some higher intelligence, call it divine, call it extraterrestrial, call it advanced future humans, decided Earth would be our home and made it so. Another possibility is that the seeds of life, drifting through space on comets or asteroids, found Earth and flourished, making it less a random accident and more a deliberate seeding. And then there's the most unsettling possibility, that we were placed here without knowing why, left to puzzle over the purpose forever. To make sense of this question, we can look at the oddities of our own species. Compared to other animals, humans are unusual. We walk upright, freeing our hands for tools. Our brains are large and energetically expensive, consuming about 20% of the calories we eat, which is an enormous investment for nature to make. Our intelligence allows us to manipulate our environment on a scale unmatched by any other species. And our consciousness, the ability not just to survive, but to reflect on survival, to think about thinking, is still poorly understood. If evolution alone explains all of this, why did it happen so quickly and so dramatically in us but not in others? Why didn't dolphins with their large brains develop cities? Why didn't elephants, with their social structures, invent writing? What made humans leap ahead so suddenly, producing art, music, agriculture, and technology in what, from a planetary perspective, was an instant? It's here that the idea of being placed begins to feel less like fantasy and more like an attempt to explain anomalies. Perhaps we were nudged along. Perhaps something accelerated our development. Perhaps intelligence itself was planted in us, like a spark waiting to catch. Ancient myths are full of this suggestion. Almost every culture has stories of beings who came from the sky or from beyond, giving knowledge, tools, or life itself. The Sumerians spoke of gods who descended to shape humanity. The Mayans described visitors who carried wisdom. The Egyptians told of deities who taught them agriculture, writing, and architecture. Even in traditions closer to us, there are echoes of being created and placed in specific environments, whether a garden or a sacred land. These stories are not scientific evidence, but they reveal something deep in human imagination. Across time and geography, people lean toward the idea that we were placed here rather than stumbled into existence. Maybe that's because being placed gives life purpose. If someone or something put us here, then there must be a reason. And if there's a reason, then our existence matters in a way that pure accident never quite captures. Science, of course, demands caution. Extraordinary claims need extraordinary evidence, and so far, the fossil record and genetic data still point to natural evolution as the foundation of our species. But even within that framework, questions remain. Why the sudden cognitive leap? Why the burst of symbolic thought? Why the rapid rise of civilization? These gaps are fertile ground for speculation, and speculation often circles back to the same question. What if we were placed here? Let's try another angle. Imagine future humans, thousands or even millions of years ahead of us. If they mastered time travel or developed technologies far beyond our current understanding, could they seed their own origins? Could they place early humans in the past, shaping their own history from the future? It sounds like science fiction, and perhaps it is, but it also highlights how the question of being placed doesn't always require gods or aliens. Sometimes, the ones doing the placing could be us, reaching backward through time to ensure our own existence. And then there's the extraterrestrial possibility. Astronomers remind us that the universe is unimaginably vast. Billions of stars, billions of planets, countless opportunities for life to emerge. If advanced civilizations exist elsewhere, it's not unreasonable to wonder whether they might experiment, explore, or even cultivate life on other worlds. If you had the ability to plant intelligence on a fertile planet, would you try? And if you did, how would the beings you created ever know they were part of an experiment? The unsettling part of this idea isn't just whether it's true, but what it implies about purpose. If we were placed here, then our existence is tied to someone else's plan. Maybe it was benevolent, maybe it was indifferent, maybe it was accidental. We might be caretakers, test subjects, or simply part of a larger pattern we can't yet see. Of course, we don't have clear answers. All we have are clues, myths, and the persistent itch of the question itself. But maybe that's enough for now. Maybe the value of the question isn't in solving it, but in sitting with it, noticing how it shifts our perspective. When you think of yourself as placed here, even hypothetically, the world feels different. The forests, the oceans, the sky, all of it starts to look less like background and more like a setting. Your life feels less like random noise and more like part of a script. Whether or not we were truly placed, the question changes us. It asks us to consider meaning, responsibility, and possibility in ways that pure randomness doesn't. And perhaps that's why humans keep returning to it, century after century, culture after culture. So as we move forward in this journey, keep the question with you. Not as something to answer quickly, but as a lens through which to see the evidence, the myths, and the science. What if we were placed here? Not just a mystery to solve, but a way of looking at ourselves, our planet, and our place in the universe. When you start to look closely at Earth, it's hard not to notice how well it fits us. We breathe without thinking, drink from its rivers, grow food in its soil, and walk comfortably on its surface. The more you list the details, the more the planet begins to look less like a random rock spinning in space, and more like a carefully arranged home. Oxygen levels hold steady around 21%, a delicate balance that allows us to burn energy without burning ourselves out. The atmosphere filters the sun's rays, giving us light but not lethal radiation. The magnetic field shields us from solar storms that would strip the air away. Water covers most of the surface, not too little to leave us parched, not too much to drown us entirely, but just enough to sustain oceans, rivers, lakes, and rain. From a scientific perspective, All of this is explained through natural processes. The Earth is in what's called the habitable zone of the Sun, not too close and not too far where liquid water can exist. Its mass is large enough to hold an atmosphere. Its molten core generates a protective magnetic shield. Its tilt creates seasons that sustain biodiversity. Each condition has a physical explanation, and together they form what looks like a miracle, but is simply the outcome of physics. Yet, when you step back from the mechanics, it still feels uncanny. Why here? Why this planet? Why so perfect for us? If you compare Earth to its neighbours, the contrast becomes even sharper. Mars, though promising in some ways, is cold, dry, and has only a whisper of atmosphere. Venus, the other neighbour, is a greenhouse nightmare, hot enough to melt lead on the surface. Mercury is scorched on one side and frozen on the other, while the outer planets are gas giants with no solid surface at all. Even the moons that seem interesting, like Europa or Titan, would be deeply hostile to us without extreme technology. Earth is the outlier, the rare jewel. When scientists search for life elsewhere, they often look for Earth-like planets, because Earth is the template, the gold standard. But that phrasing itself is telling. We aren't just living on any planet, we're living on the one that seems uniquely designed to match us. And maybe it's worth asking, why does it fit so well? One answer, of course, is that we evolved here, shaped by the environment over millions of years. Our lungs fit the atmosphere because the atmosphere shaped them. Our diets fit the soil because the soil shaped them. We are tuned to the earth because the earth is our tuning fork. But that doesn't completely quiet the curiosity. If the universe is full of rocks and dust and stars, why did a planet like this form at all? Why did conditions line up so precisely here and not elsewhere? Some thinkers argue that it's a numbers game. With billions of galaxies, each containing billions of stars, the odds say that somewhere a planet will form with conditions just right for life. We just happen to be on one of those rare planets, and that's why we're here to marvel at it. That's the simple version. But to some, it still feels like dodging the question. The odds may explain existence, but they don't explain the feeling that this planet is not just habitable, but almost too perfectly suited for us. Think of the Sun. It's stable, not prone to sudden bursts of radiation that would sterilize the surface. It produces energy in a steady way, enough to sustain life but not enough to destroy it. It's the right size, the right age, the right distance. Even the moon, that silent companion in the sky, plays a role that seems suspiciously convenient. It stabilizes Earth's tilt, preventing wild swings in climate. It drives the tides, which may have been essential in the early chemistry of life. Without the moon, Earth might be unstable, chaotic, and less welcoming. The question becomes even stranger when you think about how life itself interacts with the planet. Plants produce oxygen, which animals breathe. Animals exhale carbon dioxide, which plants use. Oceans store heat and distribute it, keeping climates balanced. Forests anchor soil, generate rain, and create habitats. The whole system is interconnected, almost as if Earth and life are co-designed. Some scientists call this the Gaia hypothesis, the idea that life and the planet form a self-regulating system. It doesn't mean the planet is conscious, but it does mean that Earth functions as if it were alive, adjusting conditions to keep itself balanced. If you believe in chance, this is remarkable enough. If you lean toward the idea of being placed, it begins to feel like evidence. Maybe Earth wasn't just the lucky winner of cosmic dice rolls. Maybe it was chosen, or prepared, or tuned for us to be here. Ancient traditions often reflect this sense of harmony. Many indigenous cultures describe Earth not as a resource, but as a gift, a mother, or a caretaker. The land provides food, the sky provides rain, the cycle provides renewal. These stories carry the intuition that the planet and humanity belong together, that we fit here not by accident but by intention. Modern science, careful as always, doesn't use the word intention. But even scientists sometimes slip into language that feels more poetic than mechanical. They describe Earth as delicate, balanced, rare. They use phrases like just right and finely tuned. It's hard not to, because the deeper you study the planet, the more it feels like a miracle, even if you explain it with physics. Now, imagine looking at Earth through alien eyes. If an advanced civilization elsewhere in the universe scanned our solar system, they would immediately notice that one planet stands out. It glows blue with oceans, white with clouds, green with forests. It has an atmosphere that reveals oxygen, a strong hint of life. If they were gardeners of worlds searching for a place to plant a new species, this would be the obvious choice. And maybe that's why the question lingers. If you wanted to place humanity somewhere, wouldn't you choose this planet? If you wanted life to flourish, wouldn't you pick the one that already looks like paradise compared to its neighbours? This isn't proof, of course. It's reflection, speculation, curiosity. But it reveals why the idea that Earth fits us too well has held power for so long. Whether through science or myth, humans keep circling back to the same thought. It feels like we belong here, and belonging is powerful. If we see ourselves as placed, Earth becomes more than a backdrop. It becomes a stage set deliberately for us. Every forest, every ocean, every sunrise looks less like coincidence and more like invitation. Whether or not that's true in the cosmic sense, it changes how we move through the world. It makes us gentler, more aware, more responsible. Because if Earth fits us this well, maybe it's worth asking how well we fit Earth in return. And that may be the real thread connecting all of this. The planet fits us so well that sometimes we forget to notice. We walk on it, drink from it, breathe it in, and assume it will always provide. But if we imagine even briefly that we were placed here, then the fit becomes a reminder. We were given a world that sustains us, and the question that follows is simple but difficult. What will we do with it? The thought of being placed doesn't have to mean overseers or experiments or grand designs. Sometimes it just means looking at Earth and realizing how extraordinary it is. And once you see it that way, you can't unsee it. When people think about human origins, the first image that often comes to mind is the classic diagram from textbooks. That slow march of figures rising from ape-like ancestors into upright modern humans. It's a neat image, but also a misleading one. The reality is not a straight line at all. It's a tangled tree full of branches, dead ends, overlaps and sudden leaps that remain mysterious. If you look closely, the story of how humans came to be is less clear than we often assume, and in those gaps, the question of being placed here slips in quietly. Fossils tell us that life on Earth has been evolving for billions of years, from simple cells to complex organisms, from fish to amphibians, from reptiles to mammals. Eventually, among the primates, a group emerged that began walking upright, using tools and developing bigger brains. These ancestors were not yet us, but they were close. They hunted, gathered, and survived in harsh environments. And then, something unusual happened. Archaeologists call it the Great Leap Forward. Within a relatively short period, humans went from basic survival behaviours to complex culture. Cave paintings appeared, full of vivid animals and mysterious symbols. Tools became refined, not just functional but sometimes decorative. Burial sites suggest rituals and perhaps even beliefs about the afterlife. Language likely emerged during this time, allowing knowledge to be shared, stories to be told, and communities to expand beyond simple instinct. What puzzles scientists is how fast this leap happened. For hundreds of thousands of years, toolmaking barely changed. Stone flakes, hand axes, the basics of survival. Then, almost suddenly, art, music, symbols and structures appeared. Why the sudden explosion of creativity and intelligence? Was it just a matter of the brain reaching a certain size, or was there something else involved? Genetics adds to the mystery. The human genome shows traces of unusual changes that separate us from our closest relatives. Small genetic tweaks that affect brain development, speech and social behaviour. Some researchers note that these changes seem clustered, as if several critical upgrades arrived at once. Evolution usually works slowly, generation by generation. Why, then, did so many traits that define humanity emerge so quickly? Comparisons to our closest cousins sharpen the puzzle. Chimpanzees share over 98% of our DNA, yet that small difference results in a gulf of ability. Chimps use simple tools, but they do not build cities. They communicate with gestures and sounds, but they do not create complex language. They form social groups, but they do not develop philosophy, mathematics, or technology. If evolution is gradual, why does such a small genetic difference produce such a massive intellectual divide? This gap has led some to wonder whether something unusual intervened. Did humans receive a push, a spark, an addition from somewhere else? Some theorists point to ancient myths, which often describe gods or sky beings shaping humanity directly. In Sumerian stories, humans are created by divine figures who mix heavenly essence with earthly clay. In Greek mythology, Prometheus brings fire, symbolic of knowledge, to humans against the will of the gods. In other traditions, people are literally fashioned by higher beings, given language, agriculture, and law. Whether you see these as literal accounts, symbolic stories, or cultural echoes, they highlight the same theme. Humanity didn't just happen. Humanity was given something, placed, shaped, or guided in a way that set us apart from the rest of life on Earth. There are also oddities in the archaeological record that add fuel to speculation. Sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, over 11,000 years old, show monumental architecture built far earlier than expected. According to traditional timelines, humans at that stage should have been simple hunter-gatherers, without the organisation or technology to build such structures. Yet there it stands, massive stones arranged with precision, decorated with carvings. How did they achieve this, and why so early? Similar questions arise with ancient maps, myths of lost civilizations, and sudden appearances of advanced knowledge in places like Mesopotamia and Egypt. It sometimes looks less like a slow climb, and more like bursts of civilization that appeared ahead of schedule. Skeptics argue that humans are simply more inventive than we give ourselves credit for, and that lost knowledge can be rediscovered independently. But for those open to other possibilities, these anomalies whisper that maybe humanity was helped, taught, or even placed. Even language itself is a puzzle. The ability to communicate complex ideas, to pass on abstract thought, to describe things not present in the moment, it seems to have appeared fully formed. No half languages are preserved in history. Wherever you find humans, you find rich, developed languages. It's as if once the capacity arrived, it did so completely. That completeness raises eyebrows. Was language a slow invention, or was it something sparked suddenly, whether by biology, culture, or outside influence? Then there's consciousness. The awareness not only of the world, but of ourselves within it. The ability to reflect, to ask questions like this one. Scientists still debate where consciousness comes from. Neurons fire, chemical signals pass between cells, and somehow the experience of being emerges. But why? Why would survival require not just awareness of predators and food, but awareness of mortality, of purpose, of the vastness of the universe? From an evolutionary perspective, this seems excessive. From the perspective of being placed, it feels deliberate. If you wanted to design a species to question its place in the universe, you'd give it exactly what humans have: intelligence, imagination, memory, and just enough mystery about its origins to keep it searching. Of course, caution is important. Every time we hit a gap in knowledge, it's tempting to insert an external explanation. History is full of examples where mysteries once attributed to gods or aliens turned out to have scientific answers. Thunder became meteorology, disease became biology, stars became astrophysics. The puzzle of human origins might one day be solved entirely through fossils and genes. But even if it is, the question of why those processes unfolded as they did will remain. And that's where the idea of being placed continues to breathe. Imagine for a moment that you could watch the story of humanity unfold from above, like a time-lapse. You'd see small groups wandering the savannas, gathering food, making simple tools. Then suddenly art explodes across cave walls, fires glow in the dark, villages form, then cities. Monuments rise, writing appears, ships cross oceans, machines take flight, satellites circle the planet. In the blink of an evolutionary eye, humanity transforms the world. If you didn't know better, you might assume some unseen hand accelerated the process. And that impression is hard to shake. Even if the science explains it, the feeling remains. The puzzle of human origins isn't just about fossils or DNA. It's about why we stand apart, why our story feels unusual, why our minds seem tuned not only for survival, but for wonder. Perhaps that is the real puzzle. We are the species that wonders about itself. Animals survive, reproduce, and adapt. We do all that, but we also ask why. Maybe that is the mark of being placed. Maybe the very act of asking is the evidence we're searching for. When we talk about evolution, we usually picture it as slow and steady. Tiny changes building over countless generations, small advantages accumulating until eventually an entirely new form emerges. And often, that is how it works. The shape of a fin shifting over millions of years into the bones of a wing, or the gradual thickening of fur in colder climates, or the slow refinement of eyesight across different species. It's a process that demands patience, and when we look at the fossil record, that patience is written in stone. But here's the strange thing. Sometimes the record shows not slow, gradual steps, but sudden leaps. Explosions of change that seem too fast, too dramatic, too coordinated to match the quiet rhythm of natural selection. The human story is not the only place we find this, but it is one of the most striking. For millions of years, early hominins chipped simple stone tools, crude and functional but barely changing. Then, within a short span, tools become sophisticated. Art blooms, music appears, culture spreads. That kind of leap makes scientists pause because evolution rarely moves in such bold strokes. This isn't unique to humans. Take the Cambrian explosion, about 540 million years ago. For billions of years before it, life was mostly simple. Single cells, then small multicellular organisms, nothing too complex. And then, in a relatively brief window, life diversified wildly. Suddenly, animals with skeletons, shells, eyes, and complex body plans appear in the fossil record. Almost every major group of animals we know today can trace its roots to that single burst. It's as if life went from sketching stick figures to painting in full colour overnight. Scientists offer explanations, of course. Changes in oxygen levels, genetic innovations like the development of Hox genes that control body structure, ecological pressures that triggered rapid adaptation. But even with these explanations, the speed of the Cambrian explosion feels unusual. If evolution is a long novel, that chapter reads more like a plot twist than a gradual development. Human evolution holds smaller versions of these twists. One is the sudden jump in brain size. For millions of years, our ancestors' brains grew slowly, almost imperceptibly. Then, in a relatively short span, the size doubled. Larger brains meant more intelligence, more memory, more ability to manipulate the environment. But they also meant bigger energy demands, riskier childbirth, and more vulnerability in infancy. Why did nature make such a risky bet, and why so suddenly? Language is another leap. For ages, humans likely communicated in simple ways, gestures and basic sounds. Then suddenly the capacity for complex language appears, not just signals of danger or food, but stories, instructions, songs. Language reshaped everything. It allowed knowledge to leap across generations, inventions to accumulate, and culture to thrive. Once again, the leap seems too quick, as if someone turned a key in the human brain and unlocked a door that had been waiting. Agriculture fits the same pattern. For most of human history, we lived as hunter-gatherers, moving with the seasons, relying on what the land provided. Then, seemingly everywhere at once, agriculture appears. People learn to plant, cultivate, harvest, and store food. Villages form, cities follow, civilization accelerates. The timeline is short compared to the long sweep of prehistory. The leap is enormous. Some suggest these leaps are simply the nature of evolution. Long periods of stability interrupted by bursts of change, what scientists call punctuated equilibrium. In that model, evolution is not a smooth climb, but a staircase, flat stretches followed by sudden rises. It's a useful idea, but it doesn't fully remove the sense of mystery. Why do those bursts happen when they do, and why are they so dramatic? Others speculate that these leaps hint at something more. Maybe outside forces, cosmic, extraterrestrial, or even intentional, played a role. If life was seeded from space, as Panspermia suggests, perhaps each leap represents a new infusion, a new upgrade. If advanced civilizations exist, perhaps they nudge certain species along, planting ideas, altering genetics, or guiding progress. If we were placed here, then sudden leaps could be the signature of placement, moments where the natural timeline was accelerated by design. Ancient myths, again, echo this. Many describe humans receiving knowledge or tools from beings beyond. Fire from Prometheus, agriculture from divine messengers, writing from gods of wisdom, stories of sudden gifts, not gradual discoveries. The myths align strangely well with the leaps in history. Skeptics argue that this is human storytelling filling in gaps. We like drama, so we turn gradual processes into sudden events. But the archaeological record still shows abrupt changes. Göbekli Tepe rising before agriculture should have existed. Pyramids appearing with precision that seems ahead of their time. Sudden bursts of culture that leave us wondering what sparked them. Genetics adds another layer. Scientists studying the human genome have found regions that look unusual, changes that appear too recent and too coordinated. Some have gone so far as to suggest the possibility of genetic engineering in our past, though such ideas remain controversial. Still, the fact that the suggestion even arises shows how puzzling the leaps can be. The broader question is why life itself seems to leap forward. If the universe is indifferent, why should intelligence, consciousness, or culture emerge at all? Survival doesn't require philosophy. Reproduction doesn't require music. Adaptation doesn't require mathematics. Yet humans produce all these things, and we do so with a drive that feels beyond mere survival. The leaps are not just physical, but mental and spiritual. They raise questions about purpose, direction, and maybe even placement. Imagine again that you are watching Earth from above, in a time-lapse. For millions of years, slow shifts, animals living, dying, evolving, then bursts, explosions of complexity, leaps of intelligence, civilizations rising almost overnight. It would look less like a random process and more like a series of interventions. Whether those interventions were natural, environmental, or intentional is the mystery. Some scientists propose that the universe itself may favour complexity, that once life begins, it is drawn toward intelligence, as if complexity is a law, not an accident. If that's true, then sudden leaps are not signs of outside placement, but simply the natural rhythm of life. But others remain sceptical, pointing out how rare intelligence seems to be. If complexity is inevitable, where are all the other civilizations? Why do we feel so alone? And so the question lingers. Are sudden leaps just nature's way of surprising us, or are they clues that something else is at work? Perhaps both. Perhaps nature and placement are not opposites, but parts of the same story. What matters is that these leaps shaped us. Without them, we would not be here. Without sudden bursts of change, we might still be making simple stone tools, wandering the savannah unaware of the stars above. Instead, we build cities, launch satellites, and ask questions about our own origins. The leaps brought us here, whether by chance, necessity, or intention. And as we reflect on them, it becomes clear why the idea of being placed is so compelling. When history moves in sudden jumps, it feels less like accident and more like design. Whether that design comes from nature, from the universe itself, or from someone beyond, we may never know. But the feeling remains, steady and insistent. Something about our story is unusual. Something about our leaps suggests that humanity's path is not just random but remarkable. Across every corner of the world, wherever humans have lived, there have been stories about the sky. Some describe it as the home of gods, some as the origin of ancestors, some as the source of knowledge, fire, or lore. It's striking how often the sky appears as a place from which something, or someone, descends to shape life on Earth. If we listen carefully to these myths, they sound less like entertainment and more like fragments of memory, retold and reshaped over generations. The Sumerians, among the first known civilizations, spoke of the Anunnaki, beings who came from the heavens. According to their stories, these figures played roles in creating and guiding humanity, even teaching agriculture and governance. Clay tablets describe rulers claiming descent from these sky beings, as if to say their authority was not merely earthly but cosmic. Skeptics dismiss these tales as mythology, but the sheer detail with which the Sumerians describe their visitors keeps the curiosity alive. In ancient Egypt, gods like Thoth and Osiris were said to bring knowledge, order, and civilization. The pyramids themselves are often framed as monuments aligned not only with earthly needs but with celestial patterns. The shafts inside the Great Pyramid point towards specific stars, as if the builders wanted to connect with something beyond the earth. Whether symbolic or literal, the message is clear. The sky was not just above them, it was central to their understanding of origin and purpose. In Greek mythology, the figure of Prometheus steals fire from the gods and gives it to humans. Fire here is not only literal flame but a metaphor for knowledge, creativity, and technology. The story suggests that humanity's leap forward was not entirely its own doing. Something from above, something beyond, placed that spark in our hands. Look to the cultures of the Americas and you find similar themes. The Mayans described gods who came from the sky to create humans, at first from mud, then wood, and finally maize. Their sacred texts describe cycles of creation, trial and error, as if beings from above were experimenting, adjusting until they produced humans as we are now. In Inca mythology, Viracocha emerges from the sea but ascends to the sky, bringing with him the gifts of civilization. Many native North American traditions speak of sky beings or star people, figures who arrive from above to teach, heal, or guide. In West Africa, the Dogon people tell stories of beings from the star Sirius, long before modern astronomy confirmed that Sirius is actually a binary star system. The level of detail in their tradition has sparked endless debate. Did they simply observe carefully, or did they preserve knowledge given to them from elsewhere? In Polynesian myths, gods and ancestors are described as descending from the heavens on canoes that crossed not only seas but skies. In Hindu tradition, the Vedas describe Vimanas, flying chariots of the gods, detailed with surprising technical language for vehicles that could ascend and descend at will. Whether these were symbolic of clouds and storms or something more, the fact remains. The sky was always the place from which transformative power arrived. Even in Abrahamic traditions, the theme persists. Genesis begins with a God who creates and places humans into a garden, shaping them from dust but breathing life into them from above. Angels descend from the heavens, bringing messages, guidance, and sometimes warnings. The central image is the same. What is higher, beyond the clouds, is the source of what we are. Anthropologists often explain these myths as projections. Ancient people looked up at the sky, saw storms, lightning, and stars, and naturally assumed power resided there. To them, the heavens were a realm of mystery and majesty, and so they located their gods above. But there's another way to hear these stories. If we were placed here, wouldn't our ancestors have remembered it as a descent from the sky? If visitors arrived, wouldn't they be described as beings from the heavens? It's easy to dismiss myths as metaphor, but the repetition across cultures is striking. Separate societies, isolated by oceans and mountains, still told stories that echo the same pattern. Beings from above bringing knowledge, shaping life, leaving behind structures, teachings, or bloodlines. The consistency suggests either a universal imagination or a shared memory of something real. Think about how myths are passed down. They are not scientific papers with footnotes and data. They are stories told around fires, sung in ceremonies, carved into stone, painted on walls. Each retelling distorts a little, reshapes the details, but the core remains. Over thousands of years, the memory of an event can become legend, the legend can become myth, and the myth can become religion. If something extraordinary happened long ago, if humans were placed here or guided by visitors, wouldn't we expect to find it preserved in exactly this way? There's also the question of monuments. Many ancient sites are aligned with stars in ways that suggest a deliberate connection to the sky. Stonehenge in England aligns with the solstices. The pyramids of Giza line up with Orion's belt. Structures in South America point towards solstices and equinoxes. Why would early humans, struggling to survive, spend so much effort aligning stones with stars? Perhaps it was reverence. Perhaps it was memory. Perhaps they were told to. The more you look, the more the myths blur into mysteries. Flying chariots, gods descending, messengers from the stars. Civilizations taught agriculture and writing by figures from above. From a modern perspective, some of these descriptions sound oddly like technology. Beings arriving from the sky in bright craft. Voices booming from the heavens. Gifts of fire, knowledge and power. It's tempting to translate these into modern terms. Spaceships, transmissions, advanced science. Whether that's fair or not, it reflects how much these old stories continue to spark curiosity. Skeptics point out that humans are pattern makers. We invent stories to explain lightning, floods, comets and eclipses. We anthropomorphize the unknown, turning natural forces into characters, and that's true. Myths are not scientific records. But skeptics also admit that myths preserve kernels of history. Floods remembered as global myths may reflect real ancient disasters. Battles of gods may echo wars of powerful rulers, and if that's the case, then myths of beings from the sky might preserve something too. If you step back, the pattern is undeniable. Again and again, humans have insisted that we came from above, that knowledge was given, that life was shaped by figures descending from the heavens. It doesn't prove we were placed here, but it does raise the possibility that our ancestors were not simply dreaming. Maybe they were remembering, distantly and imperfectly, something extraordinary. And if that's true, it reframes the question. Maybe we don't just feel like we were placed here because Earth fits us so well. Maybe our oldest stories are telling us directly, we were. When you look at the ruins of ancient civilizations, you can't help but feel both awe and confusion. Towering pyramids, vast stone cities, intricate carvings, and astronomical alignments that seem impossibly precise for the time. They stand as proof that humanity was capable of extraordinary feats thousands of years ago. But alongside that admiration sits a persistent question. How did they do it? The Sumerians are often called the first great civilization. Emerging in Mesopotamia more than 5,000 years ago, they developed writing, complex mathematics, irrigation systems and laws. They built ziggurats, massive stepped temples that reached toward the sky. They tracked the stars and created detailed calendars. When you read their tablets, the impression is of a culture that began already advanced rather than stumbling through early experiments. And their own records tell us they were taught by visitors from above, the Anunnaki. Historians frame these as myths, but the Sumerians themselves seem to treat them as history. Egypt offers a similar puzzle. The Great Pyramid of Giza stands at over 400 feet tall, aligned to the cardinal directions with uncanny precision. The weight of its stones is staggering, some blocks weighing more than 70 tons. Modern cranes would struggle to move them, yet ancient builders managed it with technology we don't fully understand. Then there's the alignment of the pyramids with Orion's belt, suggesting not only engineering skill but advanced astronomical knowledge. Official explanations say the pyramids were built as tombs, but their design, precision and placement leave many unconvinced. The Mayan and Aztec civilizations also leave behind evidence that makes us pause. Temples rising in the jungles of Central America are aligned to solstices and equinoxes. The Mayan calendar was so accurate that it rivaled modern systems in tracking planetary cycles. Their myths describe gods descending from the sky, bringing knowledge and order. Carvings show figures in strange suits, with helmets and breathing apparatus, sparking endless speculation about whether these were depictions of visitors rather than gods. In South America, the Nazca lines stretch across the desert in Peru. Enormous figures of animals and shapes carved into the ground, visible only from above. Birds, monkeys, spiders, geometric patterns, all too large to appreciate from the surface. Why create images only visible from the sky unless they were meant to be seen from there? Skeptics say they were ceremonial, offerings to gods imagined in the heavens. But the possibility remains that they were markers, signals to visitors from above. Then there are the megaliths of Stonehenge in England, aligned with solstices in ways that demonstrate deep understanding of astronomy. The stones weigh tens of tons, dragged from quarries miles away. How did people without modern technology move and arrange them so precisely? Why align them to the movements of the sun unless the intention was to track the heavens with care? Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, discovered only in the 1990s, adds another layer. Dating back more than 11,000 years, it predates agriculture, pottery, and written language. Yet the site consists of massive stone pillars, carved with intricate animals and symbols, arranged in circles. Conventional history struggles to explain how hunter-gatherers, supposedly lacking complex organization, could build such a site. The carving suggests symbolism, ritual, and astronomical knowledge well ahead of their time. It raises the possibility that humans were not alone in shaping their path, that knowledge was introduced from elsewhere. In India, the ancient texts known as the Vedas describe vimanas, flying chariots used by gods in battles and travels. The descriptions are surprisingly technical, with details about propulsion, speed, and even aerial combat. Were these purely imaginative, or were they echoes of something people actually witnessed? China too has myths of sky visitors. The Yellow Emperor, considered the founder of Chinese civilization, is often described as descending from the heavens. He's credited with bringing agriculture, medicine, and governance. His departure, according to legend, was in a dragon that carried him back to the sky. When you look across all these civilizations, the pattern emerges again and again. Monumental structures, advanced knowledge, myths of visitors, and alignments to the stars. Each alone could be explained as ingenuity, imagination, or coincidence. Together, they begin to suggest something more. Some argue that ancient people were simply smarter than we give them credit for. Necessity drove invention, and society shared knowledge across generations. That's certainly true. Human creativity is extraordinary. But even so, certain details continue to raise eyebrows. How did civilizations so early in history develop calendars more accurate than ours until only recently? How did they cut and move stones with such precision that modern engineers still struggle to replicate the techniques? How did they develop myths that so consistently describe beings from the sky? For those who lean toward the possibility of visitors, these civilizations look less like anomalies and more like evidence. Perhaps humanity was placed here, guided in its earlier stages by those who had come before. Perhaps the sudden leaps in culture and technology were not entirely our own doing. Of course, the mainstream view is more cautious. Archaeologists and historians emphasize that with enough time, labor and ingenuity, humans can accomplish incredible things. The pyramids, the Nazca Lines, Stonehenge, these are all human achievements, not alien interventions. And yet the myths remain, the monuments remain, the unanswered questions remain. Imagine yourself as one of those ancient people. You look up at the stars every night unpolluted by city lights, the sky a vast canvas of shining patterns. You see the sun and moon govern the seasons, the tides, the rhythm of life. Then, one day, something descends from that sky. A figure, a craft, a light. It teaches, guides, or simply leaves an impression so profound that your culture carries it forward for thousands of years. How would you remember it? You'd build monuments aligned with the heavens. You'd carve symbols into stone. You'd tell stories about gods who came from above, and you'd pass those stories on until they became myth, until they became indistinguishable from religion. And perhaps that is exactly what happened. We don't need to believe in alien visitors or divine interventions to appreciate the possibility. Even as speculation, it opens the imagination. It connects the puzzles of sudden leaps in evolution with the myths of sky beings and the mysteries of ancient architecture. It suggests that our origins may not be entirely natural, that something, or someone, might have had a hand in placing us here. And whether you believe the visitors were gods, extraterrestrials, or future humans reaching back through time, the stories of ancient civilizations invite us to keep wondering. Because in every ziggurat, pyramid, stone circle, and desert carving, there is a voice whispering across the centuries, a voice that says we were not alone. If you walk among the ruins left by ancient people, it almost feels as if the stones themselves are speaking. Not in words we can easily understand, but in patterns, alignments, and carvings that point beyond their own time. Across continents, civilizations that had no contact with one another seem to be whispering the same message. Their temples point to the stars, their monuments align with solstices. Their walls are marked with symbols that repeat across cultures. It is as though stone and sky were the shared language, a way of leaving something permanent behind when words alone would not endure. Think of the Great Pyramid again. Its sides are aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal directions, deviating only slightly in a way that is still remarkable given the tools thought to be available at the time. The shafts inside the structure point towards stars in Orion's belt and towards Sirius, as though the builders wanted to connect the resting place of their rulers with the heavens above. It's not just architecture, it's communication. A message written in alignment saying that the sky mattered, that whoever built this was not only honouring the dead but reaching for the stars. In Central America, the Mayan city of Chichen Itza holds the Temple of Kukulkan, a step pyramid with a clever trick. During the equinox, shadows form along the steps in such a way that a serpent seems to slither down the pyramid's side. This isn't an accident. It's precision astronomy and design combined to create a symbolic spectacle twice a year. The message is subtle but clear. The people who built this were not only capable of observing the cosmos, but of embedding that knowledge into stone so it would last forever. The Nazca Lines, stretching across the desert in Peru, are another whisper written on the earth. Animals, shapes, and long straight lines etched into the soil. They can only be fully seen from the sky, which has led to endless speculation about why they were created. Some say they were ceremonial paths, others say they were offerings to the gods. But the fact that they are visible only from above continues to puzzle. If you wanted to leave a message for the heavens, what better way than to carve it into the ground on such a massive scale? In Britain, Stonehenge stands as one of the most enduring mysteries. Its stones mark the midsummer sunrise and the midwinter sunset. For people who depended on the rhythm of the seasons for survival, knowing when to plant and harvest was essential. But the level of alignment suggests more than practicality. It suggests reverence. The stones were placed to connect earth and sky, time and eternity. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey pushes the timeline back even further. The carvings on its massive pillars depict animals, celestial symbols, and abstract designs. Some researchers argue that certain carvings may represent star patterns or even record astronomical events like comets. If that's true, then humans more than 11,000 years ago were not only capable of symbolic art, but also of tracking the heavens and recording them in stone. Across the Pacific, the Moai statues of Easter Island face inward toward the villages, but many are aligned with celestial events. Their construction remains a feat of ingenuity, moving massive stone figures across the island with limited technology. Their expressions, carved with such detail, seem to carry a quiet weight, as though they too are whispering something about connection, ancestry, or perhaps even guidance from beyond. The patterns don't stop there. In Cambodia, Angkor Wat is aligned with the solstices and equinoxes. In Mexico, Teotihuacan is laid out in a grid that mirrors constellations. In Peru, Machu Picchu's Intihuatana stone is aligned to track the sun with remarkable accuracy. All around the world, civilizations took the time to anchor their greatest works of stone to the sky. Why? From a practical perspective, these alignments help track time, seasons, and agricultural cycles. Survival depended on knowing when the rains would come, when to plant, when to harvest. But the scale and precision often go far beyond survival. It feels like more than practicality. It feels like communication, as if the builders were leaving messages not just for themselves, but for anyone who might come after, or anyone who might be watching from above. And that brings us back to the idea of being placed. If our ancestors were guided by visitors, or if they remembered an origin in the skies, then aligning stone to stars would be a natural response. It would be a way of honouring those origins, of reaching back toward the place they believed they came from, or the beings they believed had shaped them. Symbols carved into stone reinforce this. Spirals, circles, and star-like shapes appear in rock art across the world. In caves in Europe, petroglyphs in North America, and carvings in Africa, similar patterns emerge. Some look like suns, some like stars, some like objects in motion. Were these simply artistic expressions, or attempts to record something witnessed in the sky? In some places, carvings seem to show figures with unusual helmets or suits, leading some to speculate about ancient depictions of visitors. Skeptics argue that these are stylized representations of shamans or gods. But whether spiritual or literal, the symbolism is consistent: transformation, power, connection to the heavens. Consider too how long these messages have lasted. Paper decays, wood burns, even metals corrode. But stone endures. When ancient people wanted to leave something permanent, they turned to stone. Carving, stacking, aligning, embedding their knowledge into the hardest material they could find. They may not have known who exactly would see it, but they knew someone someday would. If you imagine that humans were placed here, these whispers in stone start to look like breadcrumbs, reminders left behind saying we were not entirely alone in our journey. Even if no visitors returned, the monuments point to the skies, echoing the memory that we once looked there for our origin. Astronomers sometimes describe the universe as a book written in light. Stars are the letters, galaxies the sentences, constellations the stories. Ancient people seem to see it that way too, but they added their own writing in stone. Together, sky and earth form a dialogue, a conversation that stretches across time. Today, when we study these alignments and carvings, we bring modern science to bear. We use satellites to map the Nazca lines, computer models to check pyramid alignments, and 3D scans to record carvings. But the feeling is still the same: awe, curiosity, and a sense that something greater is being whispered to us. And perhaps that's the point. The whispers don't shout. They don't give us clear answers. They don't say plainly whether we were placed here or not. But they invite us to wonder. They make us look up at the stars just as our ancestors did, and ask who we are and where we came from. Stone is heavy, but whispers are light. When combined, they create something extraordinary. A message that endures across millennia, subtle but persistent, waiting for us to listen. When people consider the idea that humanity might have been placed here, one of the first questions that rises is, who would have done the placing? And that naturally leads into the notion of higher intelligence, of some form of cosmic gardener tending to life the way we tend to fields or forests. It doesn't have to mean gods in the traditional sense, nor does it have to mean extraterrestrials in spacecraft. It could mean any intelligence greater than ours, operating on scales we barely understand, nudging life in directions that lead to beings like us. In nature, gardeners take seeds and place them in soil. They prepare the ground, water it, protect the seedlings, and let them grow. From the perspective of the seeds, everything just happens. The rain falls, the soil is rich, the sunlight arrives. They don't know there's a gardener. They simply grow. What if life on Earth is like that? From our perspective, the world seems just right. Evolution appears to unfold naturally, and yet behind it there could be something, or someone, shaping the conditions, planting the seeds and stepping back. The idea of cosmic gardener shows up in surprising places. In ancient myths, gods descend from the sky to shape humanity, teach farming, or hand down laws. In modern science fiction, extraterrestrials seed planets with DNA, watching from afar to see what emerges. In philosophy, thinkers wonder whether higher intelligence could exist outside of our perception, influencing reality in ways we cannot measure. All of these images point back to the same possibility. Maybe we're not entirely self-made. When scientists talk about panspermia, the idea that life was seeded on Earth from elsewhere in the cosmos, they often frame it as a natural process. Microbes could survive on asteroids, travelling across space until landing on fertile worlds like ours. But the theory doesn't rule out intention. If a civilization advanced enough to cross the stars wanted to spread life, they could send ships filled with spores, DNA, or even engineered organisms. To them, scattering seeds across planets would be no different than a farmer scattering grain across a field. Some would fail, some would thrive, but in at least one place, life would bloom. And that raises the question, are we one of those blooms? Did higher intelligence plant us here deliberately? If so, were they like gardeners, wanting beauty and abundance, or like experimenters, wanting data? Were they benevolent, indifferent, or simply curious? Some scientists and philosophers, even without invoking aliens, talk about intelligence at cosmic scales. The idea that the universe itself may have a kind of self-organizing principle that favours complexity, that moves matter and energy toward life and mind. In that view, the gardener is not a being but a process, a law woven into the fabric of reality. Still, the metaphor remains, seeds placed, nurtured and left to grow. When we think of higher intelligence, our instinct is to imagine something like us but bigger, wiser, more advanced. But what if the scale is so great that we can barely recognise it? To an ant, the hand that moves a rock might seem like the act of a god. To us, the hand that arranged conditions for life might be equally incomprehensible. Higher intelligence could be biological, technological, or something entirely beyond our categories. Ancient cultures often pictured their gods as gardeners, not always literally, but in the sense of shaping the land, planting knowledge, pruning civilizations when they grew out of balance. Floods, fires and rebirths are common themes. suggesting cycles of planting and harvesting. The gods give gifts, fire, agriculture, writing, law, and then step back, letting humanity grow. Sometimes they return, sometimes they vanish, but the relationship always resembles that of a caretaker tending a fragile crop. And maybe that's why the metaphor of gardening is so powerful. It doesn't demand constant intervention. A gardener doesn't stand over each leaf every second. They set conditions, check in occasionally, and trust that growth will happen on its own. If we were placed here, maybe that's what happened. The stage was prepared, the seed was planted, and the rest was left to time. There's also the possibility that we are not the only garden. If you were a cosmic gardener with the ability to spread life, why stop at one planet? Perhaps Earth is only one of many. Perhaps other civilizations are growing elsewhere, planted in their own fertile soils, waiting to be discovered or never meant to meet us at all. The universe is vast, and the number of stars and planets is almost beyond comprehension. If gardeners exist, they may have planted countless worlds. Of course, skeptics argue that we don't need gardeners to explain life. Evolution is enough. Physics, chemistry, and biology create complexity without outside help. But even within that framework, the question of why the universe allows for life at all remains. Why do the constants of physics line up so precisely? Why is the cosmos structured in a way that produces stars, planets, and eventually beings like us? Some call this fine-tuning. Others say it's simply the only universe in which observers could exist. But for those open to the gardener idea, fine-tuning looks a lot like design. Consider too the way intelligence itself behaves. Humans have already begun to shape life on our planet through selective breeding, genetic engineering, and synthetic biology. We take crops and make them more productive. We take animals and adapt them to our needs. We even begin to design microbes for medicine or industry. In doing so, we become gardeners ourselves. If we're capable of this now, only a few thousand years after civilization began, imagine what a species millions of years ahead of us could do. For them, seeding planets might be as simple as planting a field is for us. And then, once placed, the seeds might not even know they were planted. They would grow, evolve, develop stories and science, and eventually begin to wonder about their own origins. Perhaps that is exactly what is happening here. Some thinkers suggest that if higher intelligence did place us here, they may have encoded hints in our biology, not just in myths and monuments, but in DNA itself. After all, DNA is a code, a language of life. What if messages are hidden there, waiting to be discovered? It sounds fanciful, but even scientists have considered it. If you wanted to leave a signature that would last through ages, DNA would be the place to hide it. Others argue that the hints are in our consciousness, that the very fact we can ask these questions, that we can reflect on our own existence, is itself the evidence of placement. No other species we know of spends nights staring at the stars and wondering who planted them. No other species build telescopes, temples, and theories to reach beyond themselves. Maybe that urge is the gardener's signature, written not in stone or code, but in thought itself. Imagine for a moment that you are the gardener. You plant life on a world, watch it grow and wait to see what happens. At first it's simple, just survival. Then, slowly, intelligence blossoms. Eventually they build monuments, track the stars and begin to suspect they were placed. Maybe you smile, or whatever the gardener's version of smiling would be. Maybe that was the goal all along, to see if the seeds would awaken and recognize they were planted. Of course, we may never know for certain. The gardener, if one exists, may never return. Or perhaps they already did long ago, and the memory lives only in myths. But the possibility shapes how we see ourselves. If we are seeds in a cosmic garden, then our existence is not random. It is part of a pattern, a larger story. And maybe that's why the metaphor feels comforting, even to those who don't believe it literally. It offers purpose. It suggests we belong. It frames our struggles and questions not as meaningless chaos, but as part of growth. Whether we see higher intelligence as gods, extraterrestrials, future humans, or the universe itself, the Gardner idea lingers because it resonates. It takes the puzzle of our origins and turns it into a story of care, of intention, of belonging. And as we continue this exploration, it's worth keeping that image in mind. Not because it gives us all the answers, but because it reminds us that questions themselves can be seeds. Once planted, they grow, sending roots into our imagination and branches into our understanding. If you've ever looked up at the night sky and wondered whether the stars are watching back, you're not alone. For as long as humans have been here, the question of whether life began on this planet or arrived from somewhere else has stirred the imagination. Among the scientific theories that try to answer it, one stands out for how simple yet profound it is. It's called Panspermia, and at its core it suggests that life may not have started on Earth at all. Instead, it may have been seeded here, carried on comets, asteroids, or even by the deliberate actions of an intelligence far beyond us. The word itself comes from Greek, meaning seeds everywhere. It paints a picture of the universe not as a dead, empty void, but as a fertile field scattered with the building blocks of life. According to the idea, planets are like patches of soil. Some are barren, some are hostile, but every now and then one has just the right conditions to let the seeds grow. Earth may be one of those rare patches, and the life we know, including us, may be the result of seeds planted long ago. At first glance, Panspermia sounds like science fiction. Life travelling through space, hopping from world to world like pollen on the wind. But it's not as far-fetched as it seems. We already know that microbes can survive extreme conditions. Bacteria have been found clinging to the outside of spacecraft after years in orbit. Spores can endure radiation, vacuum, and freezing temperatures that would destroy most life. On Earth, certain microorganisms survive in boiling hot springs, at the bottom of the ocean, and inside rocks deep underground. If life here can endure such extremes, then it's not impossible to imagine that some forms could survive the journey through space. Meteorites add weight to the idea. Scientists have found rocks on Earth that originated from Mars, blasted off its surface by impacts and eventually landing here. Some of these meteorites contain structures that look suspiciously like microfossils, though the evidence remains debated. Even without clear fossils, the fact that material can travel between planets proves the basic mechanism. If rocks can move between worlds, carrying carbon and organic molecules, then the seeds of life could hitch a ride. The next step in the theory is to ask whether this is random or intentional. One version, called lithopanspermia, suggests that life spreads naturally. Collisions throw debris into space, carrying microbes along. After drifting for thousands or millions of years, some pieces land on other planets, delivering the ingredients of life. In this view, life is scattered across the cosmos like spores from a mushroom, drifting wherever the wind, or in this case, gravity, carries them. Another version is more intentional. It imagines that advanced civilizations, perhaps billions of years older than us, deliberately seed planets with life. Maybe they want to spread their own biology, ensuring their survival across the stars. Maybe they want to experiment to see what kinds of beings evolve under different conditions. Or maybe they see themselves as cosmic gardeners, planting life wherever they can, simply because they can. If we follow that possibility, then Earth's story begins to look less isolated. Our origins wouldn't just be the story of one planet, but part of a larger tapestry woven across the galaxy. Humanity might be a branch on a tree whose roots stretch light years away. The strange leaps in our history, the myths of beings from the sky, the monuments aligned with stars, they could all be echoes of a truth we've half forgotten. Of course, skeptics push back. They ask if life was seeded here, where did it begin? Panspermia moves the mystery, but it doesn't solve it. It says life came from elsewhere, but then we must ask how it began there. The origin question simply shifts location, but that doesn't make the theory useless. In fact, it highlights how life may not be confined to one planet at all. If it happened once, it may have happened many times, and the seeds may be scattered everywhere, waiting for the right conditions to grow. Experiments on Earth give us hints. When scientists simulate the early conditions of the planet, lightning, water, simple gases, they find that amino acids, the building blocks of life, form naturally. We also know that comets and meteorites contain organic molecules. Combine these facts with the resilience of microbes, and suddenly panspermia doesn't seem impossible. It becomes a testable, even reasonable idea. But there's another layer that keeps the imagination alive. What if the seeds weren't just random chemistry, but carefully chosen? What if intelligence placed them here on purpose? Carl Sagan once entertained this thought, suggesting that life could have been seeded deliberately as a way of ensuring it spreads across the cosmos. Francis Crick, one of the scientists who discovered the structure of DNA, also entertained a version of this idea, calling it directed panspermia. The thought that a Nobel Prize-winning biologist considered it tells us that the idea, while speculative, is not just fantasy. Directed panspermia opens unsettling questions. If we were seeded deliberately, who did it, and why? Were we meant to grow into what we are, or are we an experiment that evolved in ways the gardeners never predicted? And if they did seed us, do they still watch, waiting to see what becomes of their work? This possibility makes ancient myths feel different. When cultures speak of beings from the sky, creating or guiding humanity, maybe those are cultural memories of the gardeners. When civilizations align their monuments with stars, maybe they are honouring the origins they believed came from above. Whispers in stone, echoes in story, pointing back to a time when placement was not just a question, but a memory. And then there's DNA itself. It's often called the code of life, written in 4 chemical letters. It carries instructions for building everything from bacteria to humans. Some scientists have wondered whether DNA could carry more than just biology. If you wanted to leave a message that would endure, you might hide it inside the genetic code. One study even suggested that certain patterns in DNA could be interpreted as mathematical signatures, though such claims remain controversial. Still, the idea lingers. If we were seeded, perhaps the signature of our gardeners is already inside us waiting to be read. Even without that, DNA itself feels almost too elegant. Its ability to replicate, to store vast amounts of information, to adapt and evolve, it's as though it was designed for resilience. Skeptics say that's simply the result of natural selection. But to those who see intention, it looks like the perfect seed, crafted to last through eons and across galaxies. Panspermia doesn't just expand our sense of origin, it also expands our sense of kinship. If life is scattered across the stars, then we may not be alone. Other planets may hold other seeds, growing into other beings. Some may be simple microbes, others may be civilizations far ahead of us. If we were placed here, then perhaps so were they, and perhaps one day the gardens will meet. Imagine that for a moment. 2 civilizations, both seeded by the same gardeners, meeting across the light years, discovering they are distant cousins in a cosmic family tree. It reframes the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, not as looking for strangers, but as searching for relatives. Of course, we still lack proof. No meteorite has yet been found with undeniable fossils of life. No signal has arrived telling us we were planted. No spacecraft has landed declaring itself our gardener. But the hints are enough to keep the idea alive. Microbes that survive the vacuum of space, organic molecules in comets, myths of creation from the stars, sudden leaps in evolution. Together they whisper of a possibility too intriguing to ignore. And even if panspermia turns out not to be true, it has already changed the way we think. It forces us to see life not as something fragile and rare, but as something resilient and widespread. It turns the universe from a barren void into a field of seeds. And whether those seeds fell randomly or were scattered with care, they may explain why we're here. So the next time you look at the stars, consider that they may not just be distant suns. They may be reminders of where we came from. Maybe we are, in the simplest sense, seeds from the stars. When people think about being placed here, the mind usually drifts upward, toward gods or beings from the stars. But there's another possibility that is just as fascinating, maybe even more unsettling. What if it wasn't someone else who placed us here? What if it was us? Not us as we are now, but us in the future. Future humans with knowledge, technology, and abilities so advanced that they could reach backward through time and shape their own beginnings. Time has always been slippery. We measure it with clocks and calendars, but we also feel it stretch and shrink. Hours vanish in conversation. Minutes drag when we're waiting. Physics takes the slipperiness further. Einstein showed that time is not absolute, but relative, bending with gravity and speed. The faster you move, the slower your clock runs compared to someone standing still. Near a black hole, time itself stretches almost to infinity. It means that time is not the rigid march we once thought it was. It is flexible, malleable, something that could, under the right conditions, be shaped. If the laws of physics allow for time to bend, then the idea of moving through it, forward or backward, becomes at least possible in theory. Travelling to the future is the easier part. Astronauts on the International Space Station already experience a tiny form of it, aging slightly less than people on Earth because of their speed and altitude. Travelling to the past is far trickier, tangled in paradoxes, but even there, physics leaves cracks in the door. Solutions to Einstein's equations describe wormholes, closed time-like curves, and paths through space-time that loop back on themselves. So if time travel is not strictly forbidden, what would a future humanity do with it? Maybe they would use it to visit their origins, to watch evolution unfold, to intervene in small ways, ensuring their own survival. Maybe they would go further, not just watching, but placing, seeding their own past, shaping it, making sure that when they looked back from the future, they would find themselves here. Imagine a civilization tens of thousands of years ahead of us. They've mastered genetics, physics, and time itself. They know their own history, with all its fragility and accidents. They see how close humanity came to extinction at different points: volcanic winters, asteroid strikes, disease, war. They realize how improbable survival was. And so they decide to guarantee it. They send themselves back, not as whole people, but as seeds, DNA, cells, maybe even entire groups, placed carefully in the past to ensure that their line continues. In that scenario, the story of human origins is not linear. It's a loop. We exist because future humans made sure we would, and future humans exist because we are here. Cause and effect circle each other, each one creating the other. It's a paradox, but one that physicists have learned not to dismiss too quickly. The universe may not forbid paradoxes as strictly as we think. If future humans really did shape their past, it might explain some of the puzzles we see, the sudden leaps in evolution, the bursts of intelligence, the myths of beings from the sky. If travellers arrived with technology, they would look like gods. If they intervened in biology, they could spark new abilities. If they guided civilizations, they might leave behind traces we now interpret as myth. Some theorists even suggest that the so-called ancient astronauts were not aliens at all, but time travellers. Figures appearing in strange suits, arriving in bright craft, teaching knowledge far ahead of its time. To our ancestors, they would be indistinguishable from gods. To us, they might be indistinguishable from extraterrestrials. But in truth, they could be us, looping back to plant the seeds of their own future. And if that's the case, then being placed here is not the work of others, but the work of humanity ensuring its own survival. There's something strangely comforting about that possibility. It means we belong here not because we were chosen by outsiders, but because we chose ourselves. It also means that the drive we feel to explore, to push forward, to master science and technology might not be a new instinct at all. It might be part of a loop we've been in all along. But the idea is also unsettling. If future humans placed us here, then we are part of a closed cycle, repeating endlessly. Free will becomes blurry. Did we choose our path, or was it already chosen by those who came after us? Are we living the first run of history or one of countless reruns? If they intervened once, do they intervene again and again, each time correcting, adjusting, pruning the timeline until it fits? Time travel also raises the question of evidence. If future humans did shape our past, how would we know? Maybe the myths are the evidence. Maybe the sudden leaps in intelligence are the fingerprints left behind. Or maybe they were careful, hiding their presence, ensuring history unfolded in a way that looked natural. Perhaps the lack of proof is itself the proof, the mark of a hand that intervened with precision. Our fascination with time travel in stories may itself be a clue. From ancient myths of cycles and eternal returns, to modern films about paradoxes and loops, humans have always been drawn to the idea of moving through time. Perhaps that fascination is cultural memory, or perhaps it's simply the logical conclusion of being a species that reflects on its own past and future. But if time travel is real, then it may be less fantasy and more foreshadowing. Picture it for a moment. You're walking across a field thousands of years ago. The sky's bright with stars, no lights to drown them out. Suddenly a figure appears, clothed in strange material, carrying tools you don't recognize. They speak, but you can't understand their words. They show you how to plant seeds, how to make fire, how to shape stone. To you, they are a god, a messenger, a being from another world. But in reality, they are your descendant, looping back to ensure you survive, because without you, they will never exist. It sounds like science fiction, but it fits the pattern. It explains the myths of beings from the sky, the sudden leaps in civilization, the sense that we were guided. Maybe we were. Maybe it was us all along. This possibility doesn't exclude others. Maybe future humans are part of the same story as cosmic gardeners, extraterrestrials, or divine beings. Maybe the universe is full of layers, with multiple intelligences shaping the past in different ways. But the idea that we placed ourselves here has a strange symmetry to it. It turns the question inward. Instead of asking who put us here, we ask, what if we did? And if that's true, then every step we take toward the future is also a step toward our past. Every advance in science, every discovery in physics, every breakthrough in genetics brings us closer to the moment when we might complete the loop. Maybe we are destined to become the very beings our ancestors worshipped. Maybe the gods of the past are the humans of the future. The thought bends the mind, but it also adds weight to our choices. If we are the ones who placed ourselves here, then what we do now matters more than ever. Our survival, our progress, our ethics, all of it shapes not just the future but the past as well. The loop depends on us. And perhaps that's the deeper point. The question of being placed doesn't have to be about gods or aliens. Sometimes the most extraordinary explanation is that it was always us, looking backward and forward at the same time, ensuring that the chain never breaks. When scientists look closely at the human genome, they find a story written in code. It is a story full of similarities with other life on Earth, proof that we share ancestry with everything from fruit flies to whales. But it is also a story with peculiar twists, oddities that don't quite fit the smooth path of gradual evolution. And it is in those oddities that the question of whether we were placed here quietly returns. Humans share about 98% of their DNA with chimpanzees, our closest living relatives. On the surface, that number suggests we are almost identical. Yet the difference between a chimpanzee and a human is enormous. Chimps are intelligent, social and tool-using, but they do not build cities, compose symphonies, or wonder about their own origins. How can such a small genetic difference result in such a vast intellectual gulf? One clue lies in what are called regulatory genes. They don't build proteins directly, but instead control when and how other genes are expressed. A small tweak in these regulators can create big differences in development, especially in the brain. Humans seem to have experienced a burst of changes in regulatory DNA not long before our species emerged. It's as if someone adjusted the switches, not rewriting the whole book, but altering the way it is read. Another oddity is the size of the human brain. It is disproportionately large for our body, 3 times bigger than that of a chimp. This comes at a cost. Brains consume a massive amount of energy, about 20% of our calories. They make childbirth dangerous since large heads must pass through narrow hips. They leave infants vulnerable for years, dependent on care long after most animals are independent. Evolution usually avoids such expensive risks. Why then did it happen in us? Why so suddenly and why so dramatically? Speech is another puzzle. Humans have a unique version of the FOXP2 gene, linked to language and vocal control. Mutations in it can cause severe difficulties with speech and grammar. In other primates, the gene is slightly different, and they lack our linguistic ability. Studies suggest that the human version appeared relatively recently in evolutionary terms, within the last few 100,000 years. It is not a slow build-up, but a sudden arrival, as if our capacity for language was switched on. There are also genes that look suspiciously like insertions. Parts of our DNA seem to come from ancient viruses, fragments that merged with our genome long ago. In fact, a significant portion of human DNA, some estimates say up to 8%, is viral in origin. In many cases, these insertions don't do much, but in others, they play critical roles. One viral gene helps form the placenta, making mammalian reproduction possible. Another may affect brain function. It raises a strange question. Were these just accidents of infection? Or were they part of the design, the placement of key pieces into our genome at just the right time? Scientists also debate the so-called human accelerated regions, stretches of DNA that have changed unusually quickly compared to other species. Some of these regions are linked to brain development. Others affect how neurons connect. The fact that they shifted so fast while most of our genome remained stable suggests targeted bursts of change. Once again, it looks less like a slow drift and more like sudden edits. Then there is chromosome 2. Humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes, while other great apes have 24. The difference comes from a fusion. 2 ancestral chromosomes joined end to end to form our chromosome 2. The fusion site is still visible in our DNA. It's not unheard of for chromosomes to fuse, but the timing here is intriguing. The fusion created structural changes that may have influenced our development, separating us further from our relatives. Some scientists marvel at how neatly the fusion worked, preserving function while reshaping our genome. For those open to speculation, it looks almost like a deliberate step, a signature left in the code. Beyond the mechanics, there's the question of what our genes make possible. Humans are not just intelligent in a practical sense. We are creative, imaginative, capable of art, music, mathematics, and philosophy. None of these are strictly necessary for survival. A species doesn't need to paint cave walls or write poetry to eat and reproduce, yet we do. Our genes gave us abilities far beyond survival. It's as if we were overbuilt, equipped with capacities that seem designed for more than just getting by. Critics of the placement idea say these oddities can be explained by natural processes. Regulatory genes shift, viruses insert DNA, chromosomes fuse, and over time evolution produces unexpected outcomes. And that may be true. But the clustering of changes in humans, the way they seem to arrive in bursts, continues to draw attention. Some researchers even speculate that our genome might contain hidden messages, not in a mystical sense, but in patterns of numbers or sequences that could be read as intentional. One controversial study suggested that parts of our DNA show mathematical structures unlikely to arise by chance. Whether or not that holds up, the fact that scientists even ask the question shows how unusual our code appears. If future humans were shaping their own past, as we imagined earlier, the genome would be the perfect place to intervene. Adjust a few switches, insert a few sequences, and suddenly the brain expands, language emerges, culture takes off. If extraterrestrials were gardeners, the genome would also be their tool. Instead of building cities for us, they would build the instructions inside us, letting us grow into what we are. And maybe that explains why so many myths describe humans as created or shaped by gods. Clay moulded into form, dust given breath, ancestors fashioned from maize or wood. In modern terms, perhaps that clay, that dust, that maize was DNA, altered and arranged by hands unseen. Even if none of this was intentional, the oddities remind us how fragile and unlikely we are. A few different mutations, a different fusion, a missing viral gene, and we might not exist at all. The fact that we do exist, with minds that can reflect on their own origins, feels almost miraculous. So the genetic code, whether natural or guided, is more than biology. It is a record of where we came from, full of hints, puzzles, and possibilities. It is the script of our existence, and in its oddities we glimpse the possibility that maybe, just maybe, we were placed here, not entirely by accident, but by design. Consciousness is one of those words that sounds simple until you try to explain it. It means being aware, but it also means being aware that you are aware. It means having thoughts, but also the ability to reflect on those thoughts, to turn them over in your mind, to wonder not only about what is happening, but why it is happening and what it means. Animals are aware in their own ways. A cat knows when it is hungry. A bird knows when to fly south. A dolphin recognizes its companions. But humans seem to operate on another level entirely. We don't just react to the world. We construct inner worlds of memory, imagination, and meaning. And that difference is at the heart of the puzzle. From an evolutionary perspective, consciousness is tricky to explain. Survival doesn't really require philosophy. It doesn't require painting on cave walls or composing music or asking what happens after death. Yet humans do all these things, and they have done them for tens of thousands of years. Our ancestors sang, danced, carved, and told stories long before they built cities. It's as if the drive to express and reflect was built into us from the beginning. Some scientists argue that consciousness is simply an emergent property of complex brains. Once neurons reach a certain level of connectivity, awareness naturally arises. In this view, our experience of being alive is nothing more than the firing of billions of cells in intricate patterns. But even if that is true, it doesn't quite explain the richness of human consciousness. Why should complexity produce not just awareness, but self-awareness, creativity, morality, and the sense of a soul? Others suggest that consciousness may serve practical purposes. Being able to simulate the future in our minds helps us plan and survive. Reflecting on our actions allows us to learn and improve. Language depends on the ability to represent ideas abstractly, and consciousness provides that capacity. But even here, there are gaps. Why do we imagine not just realistic futures, but impossible ones, like flying without wings or visiting other planets? Why do we create art that serves no immediate survival function? Why do we wrestle with questions about purpose and existence that have no clear answers? If you step back, it begins to look as if human consciousness is not just a tool for survival, but something extra, something beyond. It gives us access to imagination, curiosity, and transcendence. It makes us restless, always reaching for more, never satisfied with what is. And that restlessness is unusual. Most animals are content to live within their ecological niche. Humans are constantly trying to break out of theirs. This is where the idea of being placed here slips back in. If someone wanted to design a species that would question, explore, and seek meaning, they would give it exactly what we have: consciousness. Not just awareness of the world, but awareness of the self, the ability to ask why, the hunger for answers. Maybe that is the gardener signature, not in our bones or genes, but in our minds. Ancient myths often point in this direction. Stories of gods breathing life into clay or dust are not just about physical creation, but about the gift of consciousness. Breath is a symbol of spirit, of awareness. To be given breath is to be given a mind. In many traditions, humans are distinguished from animals not by their bodies, but by their capacity to think, to choose, to worship, to wonder. In modern times, scientists still wrestle with what consciousness actually is. Some argue it is entirely material, arising from neurons and chemistry. Others suggest it may be fundamental, like space and time themselves. In that view, consciousness is not produced by the brain, but channeled through it, the way a radio tunes into signals that already exist. If that's true, then human consciousness is not just an accident of biology, but a window into something deeper, perhaps even a clue that we are part of a larger design. Consider dreams. Every night our minds create worlds that feel real, complete with sights, sounds, and emotions. We live entire lives in these dreams, then wake and carry the memory. Why would evolution give us such elaborate inner theatres? Problem solving and memory consolidation may explain part of it, but the sheer richness of dreams suggests more. They reveal the creativity built into consciousness, the ability to generate realities beyond the physical one we inhabit. Language is another reflection of our uniqueness. It allows us not only to share information, but to build entire systems of thought. With words, we can describe the past, imagine the future, invent abstract concepts like justice, love, or infinity. Animals communicate, but humans create meaning. We pass stories through generations, shaping culture, history, and identity. Our consciousness does not just reflect the world, it remakes it in symbols and narratives. Then there is morality. Humans feel not only desires and instincts, but obligations. We ask what is right and wrong. We create systems of law and ethics. We sacrifice for ideals that go beyond survival. Morality may have evolutionary roots in cooperation, but the depth of human moral reasoning seems to exceed that explanation. We argue about fairness, justice, and compassion, even when those arguments don't benefit us directly. Once again, consciousness pushes us beyond the practical into the transcendent. Art may be the most striking example. From the earliest cave paintings to modern symphonies, humans have poured energy into creating beauty. Art doesn't feed us or protect us, yet it has been a part of human life for tens of thousands of years. Some scientists suggest it strengthens social bonds, but that feels like an incomplete explanation. Art seems to arise from a deeper need, a need to express what cannot be said in words, to capture meaning, to connect with something beyond ourselves. If we were placed here, maybe this is the clearest evidence. Not in the stones we built or the genes we carry, but in the consciousness that drives us to wonder, create, and seek. It is our awareness that makes us ask the very question, what if we were placed here? Philosophers call this the hard problem of consciousness. It's not just how the brain works, but why there is an inner experience at all. Why isn't the brain simply a machine, processing input and output without awareness? Why is there a you inside, observing, feeling, and questioning? No one has a definitive answer, but the lack of one keeps the door open to possibilities. Maybe consciousness is not an accident, but a gift, a placement, a sign. Think for a moment about how strange it is that you are here, listening, reflecting, existing. Billions of years of cosmic history led to this moment. Atoms forged in stars became cells. Cells became organisms. Organisms became humans. And now, here you are, aware of it all. It is extraordinary, and it feels deliberate. Even if the mechanics are natural, The experience of consciousness makes life feel intentional, and maybe that's the point. Maybe whether or not we were literally placed here, our awareness makes us feel as though we were. And in that sense, human consciousness is both the puzzle and the answer. It is what makes us question, and it is also what makes us feel at home in the mystery. When we look at the human story, one thing stands out more than anything else. We became smart very quickly. For millions of years, our ancestors chipped the same kinds of stone tools, hunted in the same ways, lived in small groups and left behind only scattered traces. Then, almost suddenly in evolutionary terms, art exploded across cave walls, language developed, agriculture appeared, and within a blink of geological time, we were building cities and sending machines into space. It is not just that we are intelligent, it is that we became intelligent fast, almost too fast. From the perspective of biology, that speed is puzzling. Evolution is slow. It works by trial and error, selecting traits that help survival and reproduction. Most species change gradually, over hundreds of thousands or millions of years. Yet humans seem to leap ahead, skipping steps that other creatures never managed. Dolphins, elephants, and crows are intelligent in their own ways, but their intelligence has not produced civilizations, telescopes, or mathematics. What made us different? And why did it happen so quickly? Anthropologists call one part of this the cognitive revolution. Around 50,000 years ago, humans began showing evidence of symbolic thought. Beads, carvings, cave paintings, and rituals appear almost out of nowhere. Tools that had been simple for millennia suddenly became more complex. It looks less like a slow drift and more like a switch was flipped. Then came agriculture, about 10,000 years ago. Again, it arrived in multiple parts of the world in a short span of time. Hunter-gatherers who had lived in balance with nature for thousands of years suddenly began planting crops, building permanent settlements, and creating surplus food. That surplus led to specialization, trade, and hierarchy. It also led to cities, governments, and monumental architecture. Within only a few thousand years, we went from scattered tribes to empires spanning continents. And then came technology. In just the last few centuries, we've gone from horses and hand tools to computers and rockets. The Industrial Revolution, the Digital Revolution, the Genetic Revolution, each has transformed life on a scale unmatched by any other species. The acceleration is staggering. In the time it takes for evolution to normally change an eye colour or a bone shape, humans have gone from fire to flight to quantum physics. The question is whether this is normal. Are we simply the lucky result of evolution hitting on a formula that works? Or did something push us ahead? Are we a natural outcome, or are we outliers? Too smart, too soon? If you imagine humanity from the outside, watching from afar, the picture is strange. A planet full of life, balanced in ecosystems for millions of years, then suddenly one species begins to alter everything. Forests are cleared, rivers redirected, animals domesticated, landscapes reshaped. The pace of change is so rapid that the planet itself shifts in response. The atmosphere, the climate, the chemistry of oceans, all altered by a species that appeared, in cosmic terms, almost yesterday. It's possible that intelligence of this kind is simply rare, and when it emerges, it explodes. But it's also possible that our speed points to something unusual. Maybe we were given a push. Maybe we were placed here with minds already tuned for acceleration. Myths and legends again echo this. So many cultures describe humanity being given gifts of knowledge, fire, agriculture, or law by beings from the sky, or gods from above. These stories don't frame intelligence as something we earned slowly. They frame it as something delivered suddenly. Prometheus brings fire, Quetzalcoatl teaches agriculture, Thoth gives writing, the pattern repeats across the world. Even in modern science, some explanations for our intelligence feel less like gradual steps and more like leaps. The FOXP2 gene for language, the rapid expansion of our brains, the unusual burst of human-accelerated regions in DNA. Each one looks like an edit, a change that came too quickly for comfort. And that speed raises another question. Are we ready for the intelligence we have? In nature, species usually adapt slowly, giving ecosystems time to adjust. Predators evolve alongside prey, plants alongside climate, keeping balance. Humans skipped that balance. Our intelligence outran everything else. We developed tools and weapons far faster than we developed wisdom to handle them. We can split atoms before we can solve conflicts peacefully. We can alter genomes before we fully understand them. We are children with godlike abilities, and that imbalance may be the greatest danger of all. If we were placed here, perhaps that imbalance is the test. Maybe we were given intelligence deliberately, not to survive comfortably, but to struggle with the responsibility of it. If so, then being too smart too soon is not a flaw, but a challenge, one that forces us to grow into the power we were given. But if we were not placed, if our intelligence is simply a natural outcome, then the question remains why it happened so fast. Why did no other species follow the same path? Why does the fossil record show long stretches of stability interrupted by sudden bursts? Why are we the only ones writing, building, and reflecting at this scale? Some scientists argue that chance played a role. Perhaps small genetic changes combined in just the right way, producing intelligence as a side effect. Perhaps climate changes pressured our ancestors into adaptability, forcing rapid brain growth. Perhaps language snowballed, each generation building on the last until culture accelerated. Those explanations make sense, but they also highlight how improbable the outcome is. If intelligence is that fragile, then maybe it doesn't happen often. Maybe we are rare. Maybe we are the exception that looks suspiciously like intention. Imagine another world with life. Plants, animals, ecosystems, balance. But no species questions the stars. No species builds monuments. No species reflects on its own existence. That world is stable, peaceful, ordinary. Earth was like that too, until us. Our arrival was disruptive, sudden, and transformative. Whether by design or accident, we changed the rules. Are we too smart too soon? Perhaps. Our intelligence has given us power far beyond what our ancestors could have imagined. It has also given us the ability to destroy ourselves. Nuclear weapons, climate change, engineered diseases, all products of minds that advanced faster than their wisdom. Maybe every intelligent species faces this phase, the dangerous adolescence of civilization. Most may not survive it. The question is whether we will. And maybe that survival is the real answer to why we became intelligent so quickly. Perhaps intelligence is a filter, a test built into the universe. Only those who can balance knowledge with wisdom make it through. If we succeed, we join the greater story of the cosmos. If we fail, we vanish, leaving only ruins behind. And so the puzzle of our intelligence is not only about the past, but about the future. We're smart enough to ask if we were placed here. We're smart enough to imagine cosmic gardeners, future humans, or gods shaping our story. But are we smart enough to live with the intelligence we already have? The pace of our minds may be the greatest mystery of all. Too smart, too soon, or exactly as intended. Either way, it has brought us to this moment, questioning the origins of our place on Earth and wondering what comes next. If we accept the possibility, even just for a moment, that humanity was placed here, then the most obvious question follows. Why? If someone, or something, chose this planet, this species, this moment, what was the purpose? It is one thing to speculate about how we came to be, whether through cosmic gardeners, future humans, or beings from the stars. It is another to ask the harder question, the one that cuts deeper. What for? Purpose is slippery. Even in our own lives, we search for it constantly, wondering if there's a reason behind the choices we make, the paths we walk, the events we face. When we widen that search to include humanity as a whole, the scale becomes almost overwhelming. Still, the question lingers. If we were placed here, then why? One possibility is that we are part of an experiment. Perhaps an advanced civilization wanted to see what would happen if intelligence took root on this world. They planted us here, adjusted our genes or nudged our development and then stepped back watching. From their perspective, Earth might be a laboratory, humanity a test subject, history a data set. In this view, our wars, our art, our discoveries, our mistakes are all results of an experiment unfolding. If that's true, then the purpose might not be for us but for them. We might be like lab mice, unaware of the larger design, simply living our lives while others study the outcome. It is not the most comforting thought, but it is one that fits with the way humans themselves already behave. We experiment with bacteria, plants and animals, often without them knowing or understanding the purpose. Perhaps we are in the same position, scaled upward. Another possibility is that we are part of a project of survival. Maybe life is rare in the universe, and advanced beings chose to spread it wherever they could, seeding planets as a way to ensure it continues. In this view, Earth is one of many gardens, and we are one of many species planted to carry life forward. The purpose here is continuity, the preservation of existence itself. This idea has a certain beauty to it. It frames us not as accidents, but as part of a larger effort to keep life alive in a universe that is otherwise hostile and empty. Maybe the reason we were placed here is simple: to live, to grow, to continue the story of life in places where it might otherwise never exist. A third possibility is that we are meant to evolve into something greater. Perhaps our current state is not the final goal, but a step along the way. If someone placed us here, maybe they did so with the expectation that we would develop intelligence, technology, and eventually join them. In this scenario, Earth is not a laboratory or a garden, but a training ground. Our struggles, challenges, and conflicts are part of a process meant to shape us into beings capable of taking our place in a wider cosmic community. Myths sometimes echo this theme. Many describe humans as children of the gods, still growing, still learning, still preparing for something larger. The idea of trials, tests, or journeys is common. Maybe our placement is part of such a trial. Perhaps we are meant to discover our purpose through the very act of asking these questions. Of course, there is also the possibility that we were placed here for reasons we cannot understand. If the intelligence behind our placement is so far beyond us, their motives may be incomprehensible. To an ant, the purpose of a human city is beyond imagining. To us, the purpose of a cosmic intelligence may be equally unreachable. In that case, our why may never be answered. But even so, the act of asking may still matter. There is also the human-centered answer, that we were placed here because we matter, because we are meant to experience, to love, to create, to wonder. Maybe the purpose is not external, but internal. We exist in order to live fully, to be conscious, to shape meaning. Even if we were placed by others, the why may still be something we define ourselves. If you take the experiment view, then the purpose may be knowledge. If you take the garden view, the purpose may be survival. If you take the training ground view, the purpose may be growth. And if you take the human-centered view, the purpose may simply be existence. Some people find comfort in the idea that we were placed here to serve a higher plan. Others find comfort in the idea that we create our own purpose. Both can coexist. Perhaps we were placed here with only the broadest of intentions, and the details are up to us. There is another layer too. Maybe we were placed here not just for ourselves, but for others. Perhaps humanity has a role to play in the universe beyond Earth. Maybe we are meant to be messengers spreading life further. Maybe we are meant to contribute something unique, our art, our consciousness, our creativity, to the larger fabric of existence. It's tempting to think of purpose as grand and cosmic, but sometimes It may be simpler. Perhaps we were placed here simply because life deserves to be. Maybe the why is no more complicated than the joy of creation, the impulse to see what might happen. If humans create art, music and stories for no reason other than expression, perhaps higher intelligence creates life for the same reason. Not for utility, but for beauty. And yet the darker possibilities remain. Maybe we were placed here as a resource. Maybe the intelligence that seeded us has no benevolent plan, but sees us as tools or raw material. Perhaps our placement is less about our flourishing and more about their use. It's unsettling, but not unthinkable. After all, humans themselves raise and shape other species for their own purposes. Cattle, crops, pets, experiments. None of them know our true reasons. Perhaps we are in the same position, waiting to find out whether our existence serves someone else's goal. But whether comforting or unsettling, the question of why changes how we see ourselves. If we were placed here, then our lives are not isolated, random moments. They are part of a larger story, one that stretches beyond our planet and perhaps beyond our comprehension. And maybe that is the real point. Maybe the purpose of being placed is to make us ask why, to make us wrestle with questions that push us beyond survival, to make us reflect, create, and imagine. The fact that we are capable of asking may itself be the answer. In the end, whether the reason is experiment, survival, growth, expression, or something we cannot fathom, the question remains open. And in that openness we find meaning. Because to wonder why we are here is already to step into the purpose of being here at all. When we look at nature, it's easy to see it as background, a stage on which the human story plays out. But if we pay attention, nature doesn't just surround us, it teaches us. Every tree, every river, every animal carries lessons, written in the patterns of survival, balance, and renewal. If we were placed here, maybe the planet itself is part of the design. A living book full of instructions meant for us to read. Consider the cycles of life. Nothing in nature is wasted. When a leaf falls, it decays, becoming soil that feeds the next generation. When an animal dies, its body nourishes the earth, giving life to plants and insects. Water evaporates, forms clouds, falls as rain, and begins again. Everywhere we look, the lesson is the same. Endings are not endings, they are transitions. Maybe we were placed here to learn that survival, growth, and renewal are all parts of the same rhythm. Then there's cooperation. In a forest, trees don't just compete for light, they also share resources underground through networks of fungi. Scientists call it the wood wide web. Nutrients flow from stronger trees to weaker ones, ensuring the whole forest survives. Ants work in colonies, bees in hives, wolves in packs. Life thrives in systems of cooperation as much as competition. If we were meant to learn from nature, one lesson might be that survival is not only about strength, but about connection, about giving and receiving support. Adaptation is another lesson. Species change, shift, and evolve to fit their environments. Birds grow different beaks depending on what they eat. Insects camouflage to blend in. Even bacteria adjust to resist antibiotics. Adaptability is the key to resilience. Humanity, with its rapid intelligence, sometimes forgets this. We try to bend the world to us instead of bending to it. But perhaps the lesson written in nature is that true survival means balance, flexibility, and humility in the face of change. Look at predators and prey. It seems brutal at first, but even here, balance exists. Predators keep populations in check, preventing overgrowth. Prey evolve defenses, pushing predators to adapt in turn. The system remains dynamic, always adjusting. In contrast, when humans remove predators from an ecosystem, the balance collapses. Deer overgraze forests, rabbits strip fields, pests multiply. Maybe the lesson is that harmony requires tension. that life sustains itself not by eliminating danger but by balancing it. Seasons carry lessons too. Spring is birth, summer is growth, autumn is harvest, winter is rest. Every culture has marked these rhythms, shaping rituals around planting and harvesting, light and dark. The earth turns, and with it comes the reminder that life moves in cycles, not straight lines. Progress is not always forward. Sometimes it is circular, a return, a renewal. Perhaps that's why so many myths of placement speak of cycles, of destruction and rebirth, of floods and new beginnings. The ocean teaches us patience. Tides rise and fall with the pull of the moon, steady, endless, unhurried. Rivers carve canyons over millions of years, drop by drop. Mountains rise and crumble on scales far beyond human lifetimes. If we were placed here to learn, maybe one of the lessons is that time is vast and our perspective is small. Rushing, forcing and consuming may blind us to the deeper rhythms that carry all of life forward. Even the smallest details can be teachers. A spider weaving its web demonstrates persistence and precision. If the web breaks, the spider rebuilds without complaint. A seed pushes upward through soil, fragile but determined, drawn by sunlight it cannot yet see. Flocks of birds turn in unison, each individual aware of the others, moving as one. Everywhere, lessons about resilience, persistence, and unity unfold in plain sight. Some philosophers suggest that, if we were placed here, Earth itself may be the curriculum. The planet is not just our home, but our teacher. Forests teach balance, rivers teach flow, storms teach power, deserts teach endurance. Each environment shapes the people who live within it, offering wisdom alongside challenge. Many indigenous traditions echo this. Elders speak of listening to the land, of animals as teachers, of seasons as guides. Knowledge is not only in books but in observation, patience, and respect for the natural world. In these traditions, humanity is not separate from nature but part of it, placed within it to learn humility, gratitude, and responsibility. Modern science, in its own way, supports this. Ecology shows us that everything is connected. Removing one species can collapse an entire system. Protecting one habitat can save countless forms of life. The lesson is interdependence, the reminder that we are not isolated but woven into the same web as everything else. Sometimes the lessons are warnings. When we take more than nature can replenish, the system pushes back, soil erodes, climates shift, species vanish. Imbalance brings consequence. Perhaps that too is part of the design, a way of teaching limits, urging us to recognize that our intelligence must be tempered with restraint. If we imagine that someone placed us here intentionally, then it's tempting to think they left instructions not in words, but in nature itself. Lessons about cooperation, balance, cycles, patience, and humility. Not commandments, but examples, living reminders written into the fabric of the planet. And perhaps the greatest lesson is that we are students who must choose whether to learn. Animals follow instinct, but humans have choice. We can ignore the lessons, exploit the world, and rush toward collapse, or we can pay attention, adapt, and live in harmony. The fact that we have the choice may itself be the test. The irony is that in becoming too smart too soon, we often overlook the simple wisdom already around us. We search the skies for answers while forgetting that the answers may also be written in the ground beneath our feet. If we were placed here, maybe it wasn't only to look up, but also to look around. And as we continue to ask why we are here, nature remains steady, whispering the same lessons it always has. Growth, balance, renewal, connection. Perhaps those whispers are the true purpose of our placement, waiting for us to finally hear them. Civilization is one of humanity's most remarkable achievements, but it is also one of its greatest challenges. The moment we began to gather in villages, build cities, and live together in large numbers, something new appeared. Survival was no longer just about hunting, gathering or farming. It became about cooperation, governance, justice, and balance. If we were placed here, it is possible that this was always part of the test. Not just whether we could survive as individuals, but whether we could survive as societies. Civilization asks us to balance freedom and order. Too much freedom and chaos takes over. Too much order and oppression suffocates. Every culture has wrestled with this, from the earlier city-states of Mesopotamia to the sprawling nations of today. Laws were written, codes enforced, governments formed, each one an attempt to find the balance point. The fact that humans even invented laws is telling. Animals live by instinct, but humans created rules outside of biology, deciding for themselves what should and should not be done. That step alone shows how different our story is and how conscious the test of civilization has always been. Power is another part of the challenge. Once people live together in large groups, leaders emerge, some guide with wisdom, others with fear. History is filled with both. Empires rose, sometimes bringing peace and order, sometimes bringing suffering and destruction. Every time the question has been the same: what do we do with power? How do we use it? Do we build or do we dominate? Do we protect or do we exploit? Perhaps the test of civilization is not just whether we can organize ourselves, but whether we can learn to handle power without destroying ourselves in the process. Resources add to the trial. Once humans settled, resources became concentrated. Fertile land, water, metals, and trade routes were no longer shared freely but controlled. Conflicts followed. Wars erupted over rivers, fields, and mines. Civilizations prospered when resources were managed well, and they collapsed when they were misused. Again, the pattern repeats. Balance and imbalance, wisdom and greed, growth and decline. It feels less like accident and more like part of a curriculum, as if the very structure of civilization contains lessons we are meant to face. Technology complicates the test further. Every tool we invent solves a problem, but often creates new ones. Fire gave warmth and cooking, but also weapons. Agriculture gave food, but also inequality and disease. Industry gave power, but also pollution. Digital technology connects us, but also divides and overwhelms. Civilization multiplies the effects of our intelligence, magnifying both its brilliance and its dangers. The test is whether we can manage that acceleration without losing control. Many thinkers have suggested that civilizations are fragile. They grow, peak, and fall. Rome, Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Mayans, the Indus Valley, all rose with astonishing achievements and then collapsed. Sometimes through invasion, sometimes through internal corruption, sometimes through environmental change. The cycle seems almost inevitable. Perhaps it is built into the test itself. Can a civilization learn from its own mistakes? Or is collapse always the result of forgetting the lessons? Some argue that collapse is not failure but part of the process. Like a forest fire clearing space for new growth, the fall of civilizations may prepare the ground for something new. Others see collapse as warning. If we cannot sustain balance, we will not endure. If we were placed here, maybe this is the central challenge. Not just to survive as individuals or tribes, but to sustain civilizations without destroying ourselves or the planet that hosts us. The myths we've inherited often echo this. Stories of great floods, of towers brought down, of empires punished for arrogance. Whether literal or symbolic, these stories carry the same message. Civilizations are tested, and those that fail are wiped away. Humility, balance, and respect for limits are part of the trial. Today, the test of civilization feels sharper than ever. Our power extends across the globe. We can alter climates, split atoms, edit genes, and send probes beyond the solar system. No empire of the past held power on this scale. With it comes responsibility that may define whether we pass the test or fail it. Look at how we treat the environment. Forests cut down, oceans polluted, species vanishing. If the lesson of nature is balance, then the test of civilization is whether we can apply that lesson at scale. If we cannot, the system will correct itself, as it always has. Civilizations that overshoot their limits collapse. Perhaps ours will too, unless we learn. Look also at how we treat each other. Wars continue, fueled by greed, fear, and ideology. Yet at the same time, movements for justice, equality, and peace grow stronger. Civilization seems to carry both its worst and its best within it. The test is whether the best can overcome the worst. It's possible that the intelligence we were given was never meant only for survival. Maybe it was given to see how we would build societies, how we would organise, create and govern. Maybe the real measure of humanity is not in our tools or monuments, but in how we treat one another. And perhaps that's why the test of civilization feels so difficult. Because it is not about instinct, but about choice. We can choose to exploit or to share, to dominate or to cooperate, to destroy or to nurture. Free will makes the test harder but also more meaningful. If we were placed here, then maybe civilization itself is the proving ground. Can we balance power with wisdom? Can we align technology with ethics? Can we live in harmony not just with nature but with each other? The story of civilization is still unfolding. We don't yet know whether we will endure for millennia or collapse like those before us. But perhaps that uncertainty is part of the design. A test is only a test if the outcome is not guaranteed. And as we move forward, it may be worth remembering that civilizations rise and fall, but the lessons remain. Written in ruins, carved in memory, passed through story. Maybe that too is part of the placement. Not just to build, but to learn from what we build, and to decide whether we will finally grow wise enough to sustain what we've created. The idea that we may have been placed here naturally leads to another question. If that is true, who placed us? And if someone or something really did, can we find them? Humanity has been searching for its makers for as long as stories have been told. Sometimes the search takes the form of religion, sometimes mythology, sometimes science. In every age, in every culture, people have looked outward, upward, and inward, hoping to find the origin of their existence. Religion is one of the oldest and most direct versions of this search. Temples, shrines, and sacred texts are all attempts to connect with those who might have created or shaped us. Whether we call them gods, spirits, or ancestors, the impulse is the same. We want to know where we came from, why we're here, and who, if anyone, is responsible. For believers, prayer, ritual, and devotion are ways of reaching toward the makers, hoping to understand their intentions. Mythology also carries this search. Stories of sky beings, cosmic parents, and divine architects appear in nearly every culture. They may differ in detail, but they share the same theme. Humanity is not self-made. We are the product of something larger, and the stories we tell are our way of trying to remember. In modern times, science has become its own form of searching. Telescopes scan the skies for planets, signals, and structures that might reveal intelligence beyond Earth. Microscopes dive into DNA, unraveling the code that makes us who we are. Particle accelerators probe the building blocks of matter, hoping to find the fundamental rules of creation. Though the language is different, the motivation is familiar. We're trying to trace the path backward, to find the gardeners, the designers, or the processes that placed us here. One of the most ambitious scientific searches is SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Radio telescopes listen for signals from the stars, scanning frequencies for anything that looks intentional rather than random. So far, the results have been quiet, apart from mysterious blips like the famous WOW signal. But the search continues, driven by the possibility that someone out there might be transmitting, waiting to be found. If we were placed here by extraterrestrials, perhaps they left beacons, signals, or artifacts, and we simply haven't discovered them yet. Space exploration is another form of searching. Probes sent to Mars, Europa, Enceladus, and beyond are hunting for signs of life. Not because microbes on another world would answer every question, but because they would prove that life is not unique to Earth. If life exists elsewhere, then placement is not just possible but likely. Our makers might not be watching us from a distance. They might be scattered across the galaxy, planting seeds wherever they can. Then there is the inward search, the attempt to find our makers within ourselves. Genetic research sometimes reveals oddities, like viral insertions or accelerated regions, that make us wonder if our DNA carries signatures of design. Consciousness studies wrestle with the mystery of awareness, asking whether it is a natural byproduct or a clue to something deeper. Philosophers debate whether the universe itself is conscious, and whether we are fragments of that larger mind. In each case, the search is not out there, but in here, within the very fabric of who we are. Some scientists have even entertained the possibility that we live inside a simulation. If that were true, then our makers might not be biological at all, but programmers, designers of a reality we experience without knowing it is artificial. The simulation hypothesis is speculative, but it captures the same longing. If we are inside a system, then somewhere outside the system are those who built it. Finding them would be the ultimate discovery of our makers. The search also carries emotional weight. It is not just curiosity, but yearning. Children often ask about their parents, wanting to know who gave them life, where they came from. In a way, humanity is a child asking the same question on a cosmic scale. Who gave us life? Who shaped us? Who placed us here? And like children, we may not always like the answers we find. If our makers are benevolent, we may feel chosen, cared for, part of something larger. If they are indifferent, we may feel abandoned, like orphans in the universe. If they are hostile or self-interested, we may feel used. The search carries the risk of disappointment, but also the possibility of profound meaning. History shows how persistent the search has been. From ancient astronomers tracking the movements of stars, to philosophers debating the nature of the soul, to modern scientists decoding the genome, the question has never gone away. Every generation asks it again, in new words and new forms. Maybe that persistence is itself a clue. Perhaps we were designed to search, to never stop asking. Perhaps the act of searching is part of the placement, a built-in drive to reach beyond ourselves. If we were truly placed here, the makers may have left signs. They might be hidden in myths, encoded in DNA, carved in stone, or waiting in the stars. Or perhaps the signs are subtler, found not in artifacts but in the very structure of reality. The fine-tuned constants of physics, the improbability of life, the uniqueness of human consciousness, all could be seen as breadcrumbs leading us back to the source. And maybe the makers want to remain hidden. Maybe the point is not to find them, but to grow through the act of searching. Like a teacher who steps back to let students solve a problem, the makers may withhold answers so we learn to create meaning for ourselves. But the search will continue, because even if we never find definitive proof, the act of looking shapes us. It drives science, philosophy, religion and art. It makes us explorers, not just of the world, but of existence itself. And perhaps that is the real purpose of the search. Not to find the makers as much as to become more aware of ourselves. For most of history, people assumed we were not alone. The stars were homes of gods, spirits, or ancestors. The sky was alive with watchers. Only in the modern scientific age did we begin to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, we were alone in the universe. It's a sobering thought. Billions of stars, countless planets, and yet perhaps only one world with life. But what if that's not the case? What if we're not alone? What would it mean for us, for our story, and for the question of whether we were placed here? The first meaning is simple but profound. If we're not alone, then life is not unique to Earth. It is not a miracle confined to one planet, but a pattern written into the universe itself. That changes everything. It means life is not fragile, not rare, but widespread. It means the cosmos is not empty, but filled with gardens. The idea of being placed here becomes less extraordinary if we know others were placed elsewhere too. We become part of a larger family of life, not the only child of creation. If we discover even the simplest microbes on another world, it would be enough to prove the point. The universe would no longer be silent and sterile. It would be alive in more than one place. That alone would change our perspective. We would know that Earth is not the centre, but one node in a vast network of life. But if we were to discover intelligent life, the meaning would be even greater. Suddenly, we would have company in the questions we've been asking. We would know that consciousness, technology, and civilization are not unique to us. It would mean that intelligence itself is not an accident, but perhaps an inevitable outcome of life. And yet, the thought is unsettling. What if the others are far ahead of us, technologically or morally? What if they see us as children, or as experiments, or as resources? What if they placed us here? The realization that we are not alone brings comfort, but it also brings vulnerability. We are no longer the top of the chain. We are part of something larger, and we don't know where we stand. Imagine the day we receive a signal, a clear message from another civilization. Even if it's just a greeting, it would ripple through every culture, every religion, every philosophy. Some would see it as proof of gods, others as proof against them. Some would fear invasion, others would rejoice at the company. Governments would scramble, scientists would celebrate, and ordinary people would look up at the stars with new eyes. The world would never be the same. If we're not alone, it may also reframe our own purpose. Maybe we are not the experiment, but part of a larger project. Maybe civilizations across the galaxy are like pieces of a puzzle, each carrying something unique. Perhaps the gardeners, whoever they are, want diversity, creativity, and variety. Maybe our role is to contribute our art, our stories, our consciousness to the greater whole. On the other hand, if we're not alone, it could mean competition. Civilizations may vie for resources, territory, or survival. The test of civilization we already face here on Earth may extend outward into the stars. Will we meet others with cooperation or conflict? Will we share or fight? Some scientists talk about the great filter, the idea that somewhere in the development of life there is a barrier most species cannot pass. Perhaps intelligence leads to self-destruction before it spreads. If that's true, then meeting others would mean we are not doomed to isolation. It would mean others pass the test, and perhaps we can too. But what if we are not just not alone, but connected? What if those who placed us here are still out there, watching? What if the myths of gods descending from the sky were not imagination but memory? What if the search for our makers ends with contact? In that case, the meaning would be even more direct. It would confirm that our story is not only ours, but part of a larger design. Throughout history, people have reacted to the possibility of others with both wonder and fear. In mythology, sky beings brought knowledge but also punishment. In science fiction, extraterrestrials uplift humanity or threaten to destroy it. The stories reflect our uncertainty. We don't know whether being not alone would mean salvation or danger. Still, the meaning may depend less on them and more on us. If we discover we're not alone, how will we respond? Will we shrink in fear, or will we grow in understanding? Will we define ourselves by comparison, or will we see ourselves as part of something greater? Some argue that even if intelligent life exists, the distances between stars make contact unlikely. We may never meet them. But even knowing they exist would be enough. It would shift our perspective from isolation to connection. It would make us see Earth not as the only home of life, but as one of many. And maybe that's the lesson. If we are not alone, then placement becomes less of a mystery and more of a pattern. Perhaps many civilizations were placed, each carrying their own questions. Perhaps the real story is not about being unique, but about being part of a vast network of life, all wondering, all searching, all trying to understand why they're here. And so the meaning of not being alone stretches in every direction. It could mean comfort, fear, purpose, competition, connection. It could change religion, science, philosophy, and daily life. It could redefine what it means to be human. But whether we are alone or not, the act of asking changes us. And maybe that is what matters most. Sometimes, after all the questions, after all the speculation, it feels right to simply pause, to breathe, to let the thoughts rest, and to accept that mystery is part of what makes existence meaningful. We have wandered through ideas of cosmic gardeners, extraterrestrials, future humans, myths, and monuments. We have explored genetics, consciousness, and civilization itself. But there comes a point when the search is not about answers anymore. It becomes about learning how to live with the wonder of not knowing. Mystery has always been part of the human experience. Ancient people looked up at the stars and felt the same awe we feel today. They wondered what was out there, who might be watching, why the heavens seemed so vast and yet so connected to their lives. They told stories, built monuments, and passed down traditions, not because they had answers, but because they wanted to live in relationship with the unknown. Mystery was not an obstacle, it was part of life. In our time, science has illuminated much of what was once hidden. We know the distances to stars, the age of the universe, the structure of DNA. We can model the climate, split atoms, and peer billions of years into the past with telescopes. Yet even as our knowledge expands, the mystery deepens. The more we learn, the more questions appear. Why is the universe fine-tuned for life? Why does consciousness exist? Why is there something rather than nothing? If we were placed here, those mysteries may be part of the placement itself. Perhaps we were never meant to have all the answers. Perhaps the questions are the real gift, the real test. To wonder, to search, to imagine. These are what make us human. Resting with mystery does not mean giving up. It means recognizing that not everything must be solved immediately. It means allowing ourselves to live inside questions without rushing to conclusions. It means letting the unknown be a companion, not a threat. There is peace in this approach. Think of sitting by a river. You don't demand to know where every drop came from or where every drop is going. You simply listen, watch, and let it flow. Mystery can be like that river. It moves around us, through us, beyond us, and we can rest with it, knowing that we are part of its flow. Throughout history, some of humanity's greatest wisdom has come not from definitive answers, but from quiet reflection. Philosophers sat under trees, mystics meditated in caves, scientists stared at the night sky for hours simply watching. In those moments, they were not forcing answers. They were listening to the mystery, allowing it to speak in its own way. In daily life, mystery is everywhere. We don't fully know why love feels the way it does, why music can bring us to tears, why a sunset can make us pause and feel something beyond words. These are mysteries we live with, not because we understand them, but because they make life rich. Perhaps our placement here is the same, not something to solve, but something to experience. Sometimes people fear mystery, as if not knowing means weakness. But maybe it is strength. To admit that we do not know, to embrace that uncertainty, is to remain open. Closed answers end the conversation. Mystery keeps it alive. If you imagine that someone did place us here, perhaps this was always the intention. Not to give us a world with clear instructions, but to give us a world full of puzzles, beauty, and wonder. A world that asks us to search, to imagine, and to rest. There is comfort in thinking that mystery is not the absence of meaning, but its presence. Mystery invites us to keep looking, to keep learning, to keep sharing. It keeps us humble, reminding us that we are small but capable of big questions. It connects us to the generations before us who wondered the same things, and to the generations ahead who will wonder still. As we sit here now in this moment, it is worth pausing to notice how extraordinary it is that we can reflect at all. Billions of years of cosmic history, countless accidents and adaptations, and here we are, aware, listening, asking. Maybe that is the deepest mystery of all. So let's allow ourselves a moment to rest with it. Not to solve, not to prove, not to conclude, but to simply be. To recognise that mystery is part of being human, part of being placed here, part of the story we carry. And maybe, just maybe, that is enough.